we're all good to go. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another one of our LTP workshops. So today, in this workshop, we're going through the part 2 of the financial strategy. We've got the environmental scan and significant forecasting of assumptions, and there's some details on Stella, but first of all we've got Helen to go through the financial strategy, so I'll hand over to you, and I guess what we'll do is we can take questions. We'll just wait till the slides or the conversations happened around the slides, and then we can go to questions on that. So hand over to you, Helen. Thanks.
Thank you, Liz. Good morning, everybody. So the second workshop of 3 on the financial strategy. I think this is probably my favourite part of the LTP. It's certainly not battling to try and get the rates down, that's for sure. Mainly because it gives us a clear direction of where you see council going over the next 10 years, and it helps us as staff shape how those financials flow through. So the financials aren't only about spitting out 10 years worth of budgets, it's that longer term strategy which the financial strategy gives us for that piece of the LTP. So today we're looking at what I'm calling compare. So we're going to look at how our financials sit. We had a bit of a quick look last time in terms of our last financial strategy. We're going to have a look at how we stack up against some similar councils, so some peer councils. And then we'll start to shape what you think that direction looks like for the financial strategy. And then we'll, for workshop 3, we'll pull that together. So looking to get not necessarily answers, but thoughts from you today. There are some provoking questions in there, so interested to hear your thoughts and feedback on what you see and what you think. But we will circle back onto that for the third workshop as well. So the first workshop, just doing a bit of a recap, was understand. So we looked at what the legal requirements were for doing a financial strategy, what the sector best practice was, and what was actually in our current financial strategy. So today we're doing a bit of a measure up. What has the journey looked like for the last 3 years? What did we say it was going to look like for the remaining 7? What were the limits that we had in there? And then we're going to compare it to a set of other councils. So I've looked at 4 of our neighbouring councils, and I've also pulled up 6 peer councils throughout New Zealand as well, and I've got some information for you there to have a look at. There's actually a huge amount of information in today's workshop, and I appreciate that you haven't had the time to look at it, but I think it's good for us to work through it today first, and then for you to have the slides and mull that over if you choose to, because there's quite a few graphs and stats and things there as well. Within the content that I've got for you today, we're also going to have a look at the bill. So the bill figures were released, I think it was last week. The figures, that's the inflators that we use for the long-term plan. We're also going to have another look at depreciation funding, the balanced budget benchmark, have a conversation about how we handle disaster and resilience in terms of the financial strategy, and then circle back and have a think about what some principles and strategic direction might look like. So how are we going to work through today? As I've said, we're going to look at where we stand, so that's principally around debt, rate and reserves. Do that benchmarking, how do we compare? And then what comes out the other end, it's not going to be any decisions today, it's just how does that feed into how we start setting those limits and what that strategy looks like, so I can bring something back to you on the third workshop and we can have a conversation about that. As I mentioned, I've got heaps of information on our financial position. I've gone back sort of 10 years and looked at the LTP for the remaining 7 years and graphed some of that. So there's lots of real numbers in what you're seeing today. And then there's questions that I've got there for you. What are your thoughts on what you're seeing in those numbers, what you know about the environment around us and the uncertainty as well? I think I probably gave you most of this information in the last workshop. So our gross debt is planned to peak at $192 million in the LTP, and it was projected to fall to 153. And in the later slides, you'll actually see where that debt has been heading. We've got the benefit of our A++ Fitch credit rating. That's not just a rating that is based on our figures, it's also an assessment of our district's economy, their affordability, and their ability to pay to a degree as well. So when Fitch do those assessments, they don't just come and interrogate our books. They want to know what's going on in the Ashburton district. The average rate for the last LTP, just averaged across the 10 years, was 6.5%. And we'll have a look at how that's actually sat later on when I take you through the rates section. The current CPI is 4.1%, the OCR is 2.25%, and our average cost of funds at the moment, so our average cost of borrowing, is sitting at 3.61%. So there's really, hang on, I'm on the wrong slide. I've lost a slide. I've lost a slide out of this version for some reason. Something went a bit haywire last night, but I'll talk to it without it being there. Really 6 key metrics that matter when we're looking at the financial strategy and what the public sort of have awareness around as well. The first one is rates increases. So just that I've got a section on rates increases. We know that our rates increase for 27 was 9.15%. We know the likes of Waitaki 16.9, Waimate 5.2 in terms of looking at our neighbours, just a bit of a range there. Our net debt is capped at 280% as an LGFA requirement. We are sitting at 250%, so that is our self-imposed limit in terms of borrowing, so 250% of our revenue. And our interest to revenue is our debt servicing costs, it's our share of income, and our limit is 20%. So what that means is, in terms of our revenue, only 20% of what we collect for our revenue can be used to service our debt in terms of interest, which for our numbers, and you'll see this in the graphs, is not a limit at all.
Hamish?
So just a really brief comment to follow Helen's reference to the 250%. Council had previously had a debt limit of 280% as per the LGFA covenants, but lowered it to 250 as a self-imposed measure in COVID. And so Council hasn't raised it since then, but the 250 was only brought in, I think, in 2021. As a measure to manage expectations and self-limit rates increases through COVID.
So that's the first of 6, the first 3. So we've got rates increase, net debt to revenue, and interest to revenue. Total debt per ratepayer is something that people use as a comparison across councils. For the annual plan 2027, we're sitting at 12,360. So that's the amount of debt that we carry per ratepayer. And I've got some information on that in the debt section for you today. The rates affordability, I've kind of got some notes on the next slide. That's something that is sort of thrown out there to be conscious of, and something in terms of our philosophies and principles as we work through the financial strategy and our credit rating, which I've referred to previously.
Can I ask a question?
Carolyn, yeah.
Are we going to, Helen, through the chair, are we going to be looking at our total debt per ratepayer in other councils as well? So we get it, that's coming on later. Yeah.
In terms of affordability, looking at rates versus income, so our mean annual earnings, and I think the stats that I took from here, I think were either 24 or 25. The mean annual earnings for our ratepayers is $72,500. Our mean average household income is just under $130,000. And the average rates for 25-26 was 3696.
Richard?
That income, is that residents or ratepayers?
Ratepayers. Hang on, which figure? Mean
You just
average
said a number of
household
72
income?
You had an income of 72,000, gross net income of ratepayers, you said, but ratepayers and residents are quite different because of, how do you get that number? I'm just interested because obviously residents.
It'll be residents.
Be residents, yeah.
Yep.
That's quite a different,
Yes.
there's two groups almost, isn't
Absolutely.
it? Yeah.
Yep. And sorry, just a correction on the number on that first box. So I've said average rate's 3696. That's actually 2627.
Okay.
I updated that with the latest one.
Julie?
On the, I think it was the previous slide, it said rates increase for the next 10 years 65%. Do you have any projections on wage increases at all?
No.
Okay.
That 65% was over 10 years, so the average was 6.5. Yeah. All we do have is the bill figures, which is inflation indicators, and I've got a section explaining how that's worked out for local government inflation. Okay, that's on that cost pressures there. So Burl come out with a set of numbers that we refer to as the LGCI, and I'll go into that in a bit more detail later on. The Burl forecast, which is essentially a local government specific inflation forecast for the first year of our long-term plan, the average is 2.2%. So if we just apply the average across all of our works, would be 2.2%. But there are some variations in that. So they have looked at specific sections of the work that we deliver as well. They're saying that roading, the first year forecast for inflation is 1.8%, and waters is sitting at 2.7%. Which probably out of what we've come out of does feel low. But we can have a look at that when I get to the inflation side. The ability to pay, that's a really hard one to measure at the end of the day, and it's not really until you're sitting with the rates team and hearing the calls and seeing the arrangements that need to be paid in, and you can do as much modelling as you want, but it's just about impossible, I think, to model that ability to pay. But when it comes to the financial strategy, right through the revenue and financing policy and then the rates modelling, I think it's something you always naturally keep at the back of your mind in terms of how things are structured and how things are paid for and what we deliver in terms of level of service as well.
Russell?
Thank you. And that ability to pay will also be affected, with ageing population. So over the next 10 years, we're going to have far more people on fixed incomes at the end of that 10-year period than we do today because of our ageing population and the baby boomer scenario that we're in.
Potentially. So another jigsaw piece to the puzzle of the long-term plan is around those assumptions and what does the makeup of our district look like across that period of time as well.
Richard?
Helen, you said the average rates was 2627, is that correct?
No, 3696.
36. No, you said you correct. I thought it was the number you corrected.
Oh, sorry, 2627, yes.
Oh, okay, sorry,
Yep.
the number. Yeah, I thought you changed the number. Yeah, so
Yeah.
so if you divide that by 52, that's about $75 a week. Is that right?
Round about
I
there.
can't do the maths down there at the
Well,
moment.
I just didn't understand. So that's average per resident, or is it average per? What is that number?
It's just a straight average, so that's our 62 million divided by 16,600
It's sort of per household, effectively.
per ratepayer, not
Per
household,
ratepayer.
but per ratepayer.
Yep.
Yep.
Yep. Because that's a number that's interesting to understand. If that's the average number that you're paying per week, it's a good number to understand.
Yeah, and averages are a very good way to compare and to summarise, but of course they mask the data that produces the average, and there's obviously highs and lows to produce that average. Yeah.
Carolyn?
There's no, and I'm just following on from Hamish's point. I mean, we have tremendous highs and lows in this district because, as we know, dairy is on the increase or has been, and other things are not. Can we do it per demographic? Can we do the average per demographic, like per age or per town versus country, or manufacturing versus retail, or I don't know? Is there any other more? Is there data that we can get in more finer information?
Only really in terms of by property types. So our IBIS rate modelling will be able to give us for each of the communities, or commercial, industrial, farming, residential, but not who's actually living on those rating units, because remember, rates are assessed basically on the rating unit that's there.
Yes,
It's not a people tax or anything like that.
No, it'd be good to have. I don't know how you'd get it, but it'd be good to go down more granulated. So
We will be able to for the LTP. So just still on the ability to pay, for the rating year ended 2026, we processed 1,400 rate remissions. Rate rebates, I get the terminology right. So the rate rebates is a central government scheme. It doesn't cost us as council, it's central government money, but it does just give you a bit of a feel in terms of our 16,600 rate payers. 1,400 of those applied for a rates rebate.
can I ask a question, Mia Liz?
Yes.
What is the? Can you just remind us all about the parameter or for the rates rebate? How are you eligible for a rates rebate? Family income, household income?
Yes, so income tested, not asset tested, but income tested, and the quantum of rates that you pay as well.
So it's income tested equivalent to, do you know off the top of your head, ballpark?
No.
No, okay.
And it's subject to decision by central government. So we simply administer this scheme essentially for DIA, and one of the changes, I think it was last year, is they raised both the income limit before that you're allowed to earn before not getting a rates rebate, and they lifted the total limit. So the number of people receiving the rates rebate scheme is very dependent on the settings that the government put in place, and it had not been adjusted for a very long time, and then they did change it last year, and we've seen quite a lift in the number of people qualifying because of those settings altering.
And I think, I'm just looking at the article now, maximum is $790 that you can get as a rates rebate, and there's a little rebate calendar there that you can look on our website. Deb?
I just had a question around that. Do people, they have to keep applying? So is it?
Yes.
It's annual.
Yeah, so when the rates goes out 1st of July, they have to reapply.
Julie?
On that topic, I don't know if now's the time to mention it, but the rates assistance scheme that's coming in, how does that fit in the long-term plan, or will we get to that later? Or
Not today. It's not in existence yet. So we don't really know anything more than the presentation that you were given. But it would be there, once it goes live, it would be there for people to use to pay their rates essentially in a postponement sense.
Do we know if it's going live within, the next year or so?
I think the scheme is called the Ratepayer Assistance Scheme.
That's right, yep.
And the way the government, so LGNZ is lobbying for a range of things that might assist a ratepayer. The way I recall the government's announcement, it was utilising that scheme to access solar. So it wasn't the full suite of benefits that LGNZ were advocating for, and I don't think it yet is approved by the government to assist the payment of rates.
No.
It was simply supported by the government for the aspect of that scheme that supported access.
But no timeline for it yet?
Just for the solar piece? So there's no timeline on any of the rest of it at all. The government has only commented on the solar piece, so not assistance to pay rates, but the ratepayers' assistance for solar.
Carolyn?
I've just Googled the income threshold before tax. Standard households can earn up to $33,000 to get the maximum rates rebate of $830. Obviously, the more you earn, the less you get, sort of thing. And Super Gold card holders can earn up to $46,000. So that's 10% of our people are managing to get rates rebates.
Just remember, it also depends on the amount of rates that are being paid on the property. So it's not as simple as saying you'll get this amount if you earn this amount. It depends very much on the rates being paid as well. So it's a formula that works.
Tricky, as we learned
with all the levers involved.
But it gives us an idea.
Right.
And just the last box on the left-hand side, 284 new house consents in the district for the last year. Those new houses spread the base of our existing infrastructure, I guess. There are some additional costs when new houses come on stream. You think about things like waste collection, but at the end of the day, there is a base cost here that is spread with growth. So just some things to think as we work through the slides today. So think about, and yesterday sort of put a bit of a spanner on my works, but I do have a slide. But think about what's affordable in terms of rates increases, who should pay, and how does it work for those who can't or are least able to pay. And there's just some example answers there as well. But yeah, that might be stymied a bit, who knows? Richard?
Helen, have you got any slides on expectations versus affordability? Because obviously it's easy to say, at the moment we're in an election where everybody else should pay for me to be better off. That's pretty much the tone of this election. We'll tax the rich because I'm not rich, you know what I mean? So in this case, expectations versus affordability, because obviously it's easy to say we need to do all this and we need to do all that. But some things like water we've got no choice but to do. Some things we are non-choosable and other things are choosable. So do you talk about that?
I've got some modelling around the waters and the water services delivery plan, what that initially looked like, to give you a bit of a feel. I haven't modelled anything for our next 10 years because we're not at that point with our budgets, and the idea is that you set this direction, we do our budgets at the same time, and then I bring those two tracks together for you.
Probably what I'm getting at is if we have to live, we live within a 4% rates cap, excluding water, but if water comes in at 5% a year, every year, or 7%, that would mean that we can't actually have a 4% increase because the total rates bill will be going up by, we can, but the public would say you can't have 10%. We could say 10% is our rates bill and 6 or a big proportion of it's water, therefore we're only going up 4. Well, the public won't accept that. They'll expect us to balance our books. So I
understand the point. I think, Mel, is there's two ways of looking at that. So the rates cap will become law. And it will require us to live within the law by 2029, if passed as it's currently proposed. And that obligation will be to have all rates within that band, excepting water. So we can legally comply, by having the rates increases within those parameters. How you judge that to be affordable for your community is then the wisdom that councillors have to bring as a group. The obligation of the rates cap is clearly real and legal, and we will have to do that. But what you deem ratepayers are able to afford between water and the rates cap will be the call you will have to make. And there's the brand new regulatory environment for water, including ComCom and Te Mata Aroai. So there's going to be a balance between the requirements and what you deem the community can afford. Equally, you can't go below 2% rates increase. So you don't for all non-water rates. It's actually a band where the minimum applies as well as the maximum, and that's on the basis of keeping up with investment in the services the community needs, rather than having such a low rate increase or zero that kicks cans down the road for future generations. So there's a whole balance in here, but in the end, it's you that will assess the community's ability to pay the rates.
Russell?
Thank you. Has there been any conversations around the regional council functions within that rates caps? Because suddenly we're going to have unitary councils who in 2028 and 1 year later they're faced with a rates cap, yet they're going to have unitary functions to fulfil, which they may struggle to do within that rate cap. And I mean, it's a big unknown, isn't it?
Regional councils are caught by the cap as well. So they strike rates, and so their rates aren't special in terms of the legislation. So unitary functions will have to live within the cap that they would have been in through the regional council. So what I'm trying to say is the district, the new unitary council, as it is formed and merges and assesses how it complies with the law, will take the situation from all its constituent parts, i.e. the district councils that are merging, plus the regional council.
But as it sits now, the regional council could have put their functions up by 4%, so could have the council, whereas when they're one, they'll actually be constrained to...
Yes, but it's off a bigger base. The regional council
it is
rates
off a bigger base.
The regional council rates are then part of the calculation for the unitary council. That's what I'm clumsily trying to say. Yeah.
So the rates, the 2 to 4% rates capping will come in from July 2029.
Yeah.
But they're kind of expecting us to work towards that over the next two years with the LTP, and then we can apply for an exemption if we have any big projects. So will you, looking at an LTP for 10 years, would you then indicate that maybe in 2032 we've got a big project, so that would be the year that we would apply for an exemption? Would you go that far?
I think that
ahead to look
regime
at
needs to be better understood. The
Okay.
legislation was yesterday,
Yes,
and it isn't passed yet. So I think the government's intention, though, is not to have exemptions for big projects. I think their intention is to have exemptions for recovery from emergency management, from floods or whatever, and otherwise to be very rare and based on the council's financial sustainability. So I don't think there's going to be a plethora of exemptions because somebody wants to do a project. If the project is important, you will have to find a way to fit within the rates cap. I don't think it's you've got.
I actually thought you could have an exemption.
But the language in the introduction was that they will be rare. So I don't think every council who's got a big project is going to get an exemption.
Right.
But that's to play out. I think we're a little bit ahead of how that's going to work. For the first 2 years before it becomes the hard and fast cap, I think the language is councils must have regard to the rates cap.
Yeah.
So you're thinking about the coming cap as you set the rates for the next 2 years.
Yeah. Richard?
Doesn't it mean going forward, though, that we have to, pardon the language of the government, is to have them have to do's is a separate discussion to the want to do's, because the have to do's are water and roading and rubbish and that sort of stuff. They're have to do's, and that will set our base rates. And then if we want to do some stuff above that, we have to manage how much how much room we have to do that. Whereas in the past we perhaps we could look at holistically at the whole thing and say, well, we can balance it out. Whereas isn't that time past? There's almost like a baseline of stuff we have no choice but to do.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly what you'll have to work through. Overseas examples of introduction of rates cap also involve examination of other revenue, and certainly stories from the UK about fees and charges being increased quite significantly, stories out of Australia where debt levels rise quite considerably, Australia where cash reserves get run right down. So there are a host of ways in which councils historically have responded to the cap, putting pressure on everyone's perception of must-dos and nice-to-dos.
Yep. Tony?
Thank you. So by way of example, if the bridge project was 2030, would that be classed as a special project? Like, would we still be constrained with that project if we had to be within 4%?
I think it's a good example where council would make an application for an exemption, but there's absolutely not clear that it would be granted for a project that you're planning to do. I know the emergency management people asked to be exempted from the salary cap so that emergency management planning was not compromised, and the ministers ruled that out.
Yep.
So they're not looking to have a whole host of exceptions to render the cap meaningless. They want the cap to have meaning, and therefore it'll be administered in that fashion, I suspect.
Phil?
Minister Watts was on the radio this morning saying that the exemption bar will be very high, and it's more about disaster recovery, etc.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you. And we've been to conferences and heard from mayors, CEOs in Australia where they've had the cap to that cap, and then they've had to apply for exemptions, and when they've applied for those exemptions, some of the rate rises were 30-40%, weren't they?
Yeah, what I think has happened in Australia from the anecdotal stories we've heard is that councils have stored up their exemption applications on the basis that if you're going to apply, you have a fair old crack. And there was one story of a council in Sydney that waited a number of years, got significantly behind their financial resources they needed, and then applied for a rates exemption to the cap that was very high. It got misrepresented in the media as well as an annual increase, whereas it wasn't, but it was still a very big increase. And the government's is live to all that. They understand all the issues that have arisen elsewhere around the world. What they're trying to do is manage the level of rates for the community, not have an elaborate system of exemptions and outliers that mean you've just now got a bureaucratic system to mean rates can be higher. That's not what they're trying to do.
And I see an invite's just come through, councillors, for our LGNZ briefing with Brad Olsen on the 11th of September around rates capping, so that could be quite interesting to go online and listen to. Helen?
I think we've just about covered off my slide.
Yeah.
Probably just run through the middle box there, implications for the financial strategy and LTP. I guess still just a reminder, it is in the bill stage, so we don't have legislation around it yet, but I guess we just need to be mindful as we work through this. So at this point in time, we still need to set rates limits for the financial strategy, for the long-term plan. By nature of the way that IBU will be working, we're separating out the non-water from the water as we work through the numbers, and I've got some of that here for you today. Obviously, we need to think about levels of service and trade-offs, and I think regardless of rate capping, we will be having these conversations anyway, but it might just sort of test the thought process a little bit more in terms of who pays, how we pay, what the levels of service, and how we fund things going forward. And just that third point there about building an evidence trail. So I just think we need to be thoughtful and record the decisions that we do make and the reasons why as we build that story around the LTP. We do have one thing in our side with the rates capping. So the rates capping isn't just a straight, as it's proposed, a straight average increase. It's on the average per rating unit. So with growth for our district, and as I referred to earlier about those new building house consents, they are carrying, or we're spreading the load of our fixed costs. So we do have the benefit of some growth there to help with that, because the growth is part of the calculation at the end of the day.
Jeanette?
Just to be clear, some of our fees and charges have legal caps, don't they, that we can do, and then we've got others that are open, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yep. Okay, let's get into the fun stuff. So this section is looking at debt and borrowing and headroom. So at year end, our external debt, and you'll see this through the annual report, is sitting at $139 million, which is actually $5 million less than we were in 2025. That's cash debt, okay? 2026, our total debt, so we've got internal borrowing sitting in there, is at $183 million. So I've done that big piece of work around the reserves and came back to you and said, hang on a minute, we've actually been using the money from asset sales and things to repay our debt on our balance sheet. But these activities are still building things and borrowing, and the debt is actually higher. So that's sitting at $83 million. So there's about $44 million worth of internal borrowing that we're carrying through reserve balances, essentially. The LTP, when I look back at that, we said that our debt was going to peak at $192 million in 2028. We limited, through the financial strategy, our debt at 250% of our revenue, and I've got some graphs around that. And we've already mentioned the 280 is the LGFA cap, so we can move to 280 if you feel that's the right thing to do. So as we work through...
I'll go to Phil.
Just a quick question. Did you say earlier that we're at our ceiling now with the 250%
No.
net debt? No.
No.
Carolyn?
If we did want to change
Yes, just speak into your
if we
microphone.
did want to change our limit from 250 to 280, does that require a review of the revenue and financing policy?
No. It's a decision you make through the long-term plan.
Okay. Russell?
That peak debt time, was there a specific project that was making that debt get to that level at that time, or was it?
From what I could see, it was around the bridge again, principally.
Yeah.
And then the debt starts to taper off as it's repaid.
Okay.
Okay. So as we work through the graphs, just keep in the back of your mind the 250, the 280, and then as we get later through the workshop, we look at things like disaster and resilience and how we provide for that as well. And also the headroom in terms of what deliverables we have, and we don't have those numbers for you yet, but we do know there are things we definitely need to do for our three waters at least, and how those would be paid for as well.
Phil?
Thank you. The net debt you talked about peaking in 27, 28, 192 million. Can you tell me the difference between that and the total debt?
The 192 that would have been in the LTP would have been external debt. So in 24, we moved to just recording debt as external debt, despite the fact there was obviously some internal debt sitting there but wasn't recorded. So the 192 would have been borrowing from the bank. There still would have been internal borrowing in there, but you wouldn't have seen those figures through that LTP process.
Thank you.
Richard?
The ratchet effect, so saying that net debt under 250% of revenue, all you do is increase your revenue, put your rates up, and you can borrow more money. That's how that works, isn't it, effectively? Because
You increase your revenue
it's not
streams,
a-
you can borrow more. Yeah.
it's not like a person who owns a house. Their debt ceiling is set by the value of their house. All we do is just charge more rates, then we can borrow more money. Charge more rates, we can borrow more money. That's
But then you've got to think about things like affordability.
yes, I know, that's what I'm
Yeah,
saying,
yeah,
but
yeah.
that's where they say the 250. A lot of councils will just charge more rates, therefore can borrow more money. So, but I would have thought it's more the balance between how you fund your OPEX and how you fund your capital. And I think you've mentioned their growth is the next bit you're going to get onto, and that's the same thing. It's that balance between who should pay.
That's a factor as well. Yep. Okay. Let's look at some graphs. So interest expense is a percentage of rates revenue. Our limit in the last long-term plan is set at 25%. So for every dollar of rates revenue we get, we can only spend 25 cents on interest payments. You can see we're well below that limit. So I've gone back and modelled back to 2016 and then taken that right through to the current annual plan. I've actually modelled the internal interest expense cost on there as well. That's the turquoise colour on the top. And you can see in that 2023 year, that's when we started just recording external borrowing. And then that process changed and we're capturing both now. And the limit as it's set, you're not required to record the internal borrowing as part of the calculation. Okay. The measure that you do see across councils is just external debt, because that's the assumption that that's the cash going out of the business to pay for it. But at the end of the day, the internal borrowing, we still need to service the cost of that, because otherwise those reserves are missing out on what otherwise earnings they would be getting as well. So that is a conservative approach by having the two colours of the bars there.
Carolyn?
I support including the internal borrowing because it's an opportunity cost, isn't it? We'd have it in the banks earning money.
Absolutely.
So it's absolutely a cost to wherever it's incurred. So I support this approach, Helen. Thank you.
Richard?
So just to clarify that, Helen, you said in the past it hasn't been done. So it's been charged, has it, or not been charged?
It has been charged, but I don't think because you've looked at annual reports, you've not been able to capture and see it in this way against the limit. Yep. This graph doesn't really look any that much different from the last one, but this is interest expense as a percentage of our total revenue. And you can see that the limit that's sat there at 20% is just no limit at all. We're not constrained in terms of our revenue streams and the costs of our interest.
Richard?
It'd be fair to make a comment that the building we stand in here is a big lump of that debt increase, because it's if we look back and they'll go, look at this council, they've increased their debt, what have they done? So it's good just to clarify that, that was the biggest project the council had ever done, effectively, this building, from a capital point of view.
I say yes, but I'll counter that with saying that the debt at the end of, I think it was 25, was only recorded at 22 million against the building, and that's the piece of work that's been doing through the property reserve, and we now know that's sitting around about 38 million.
So just to clarify, how did we go from at 23 to 24, basically nearly doubled? Why did it double?
The other work increasing debt has been water. So the water treatment plants that are all across the district have required debt. So it's not just this building that has caused an increase in debt by any means. Yeah.
Oh, Phil?
Yeah, my question was similar to Richard's, I guess, in terms of the big jump. But who decides that 20% and 25% in the previous screen in terms of limit on interest expense? And
You do as council through the financial strategy limits.
I would have, yeah.
So that's something we set before
Yes.
the LTP?
Yeah.
Deb? Oh, same question? Yeah, okay.
This is another limit that we've got in the current long-term plan. So this is your 250%. So we set ourselves a limit of not borrowing any more than 250% of our revenue. You can see where the annual plan is heading. Now, I've taken a conservative approach on this one too, likewise with the interest, and I've said total debt in terms of my calculation. I'll just check my notes that I've got here. This one's worked out on net debt, but I've got some other graphs that I'll show you on total debt. So when it comes to net debt, you can see we're sitting under that 200%. The net debt is looking at the 139 million, and then that goes up in the 2027 because of the borrowing for the bridge. So that's why you're seeing that lift as well.
And you said that was going to drop in year 10, so 33, 34.
That was the long-term plan.
Long-term plan, yeah.
Okay.
Right. Russell,
Thank
sorry.
you. And that drop year 10 happens every time because you're projecting so far out that you're not sure what projects you're going to have. So if you went back 9 years ago when we last did the LTP and looked at the year we're peaking, it was probably nothing like that 9 years ago, but
Yeah. And you've got that graph up there now, Carolyn.
Thank you, through the chair.
Pull the
Helen.
mic over, sorry.
All our LGFA financial ratios and headroom, do they all have to be met? Like, you know, we had our last audit risk and finance, and I thought if we borrowed another 16 million, our liquidity ratio would be in jeopardy. Is that, and then you said, I think at the meeting, well, we can adjust that. So they don't all have to be met at once. Is that the case?
We're required to meet our limits. These particular limits that we're looking at today, they're only tested at year end. They're reported through the annual report. These limits we're just nowhere near breaching.
No, clearly nowhere near breaching. But
it's the Treasury policy limits that I think you're referring to. So in terms of liquidity, yeah.
And that's potentially, but we can address that. I think you gave us confidence in that at
Within
the last
the
audit risk
quarter,
and
we
finance.
address it. Yeah, so you may breach for a day or the like, but it's what we refer to as a technical breach. Yep.
Thank you.
Richard?
The only trouble with these graphs is the borrowing capacity. If I looked at 2022, the OCR went from 1% in February 2022 to in November it went to 4.25%, the OCR did. So just the net debt has to be taken into account with interest rates, because you can borrow as much as you like, but if your interest rates double, you've effectively borrowed twice as much, haven't you? That's the logic.
The cost for servicing the debt.
Yeah, and I think these limits work in tandem with each other. So you've got absolute borrowing limits, but you've got interest as a portion of revenue limits, which goes to the point of your borrowing costs. So they work in tandem rather than you can do just one and not the others.
Carolyn?
And I think we also always have to keep in mind the affordability issue as well, because it's paramount, really.
So this is a bit of a crazy looking graph, but I'll walk you through it. You've got two lines there. They are anchored to the right hand axis, which tells you how much headroom we've got in dollars. And if you look at the red line for, say, LTP, it says LTP 2028, but I've based that through to the annual plan, and then I've modelled forward for our LTP borrowing, what we said we were going to borrow in the LTP. We're looking like we're sitting between sort of $40 to $50 million worth of headroom in 2028. So that 40 million headroom, that's our borrowing capacity under that 250% limit. That goldy mustardy line is what does it look like if we lifted our limit to 280%. So you can see the peak of our borrowing is sitting in that 2028, which is what we said in the LTP, and that headroom does come back as debt is repaid. But I've had to make some assumptions with this graph. So what I have done in terms of the numbers, because we've done things differently over the last 2 years basically, and our debt is different to what we projected it would be in the LTP. But for the modelling purposes, I've taken our current position year end 2026, overlaid 27 annual plan, because we know that's how it's going to play out. And then I've picked up the water services delivery plan, what we said we were going to do in the water services delivery plan, and overlaid that on. And then I've inflated our revenue, our other revenue, so our non-waters revenue, by 4% per annum, which is rather ironic with the numbers coming out yesterday, because I did this a couple of weeks ago. So that's essentially if our revenue sits at 4%, but our revenue isn't just rates revenue. Remember, we've got subsidies and user fees and charges and things in there as well. That's probably a really conservative view because that's based on total borrowing. But my approach again is, if you wanted to do something with those reserve balances, we would have to go, even though they're reserve balances, we would have to go and borrow from the bank to get that money, which converts those reserve balances, the internal borrowing, from internal borrowing to external borrowing. So that is my reason for taking this conservative approach. So it might look a bit scary when we think we've only got $40 million worth of headroom there for 2028, but just remember that's under that really conservative approach.
Thank you. Phil, you've got a question?
Yeah, just running back to graphs, sorry, the last one and next one back, yeah. And how do we align that interest and revenue jump in 23, 24 with the next graph, which doesn't show there? I mean, there's an increase, but not to the percentage that it looked like on the graph. I think they're different.
Asset sales were being applied against debt, which reduced our debt, our external debt. That's net debt, remember? So I've taken the numbers out of the annual report. I mean, I could unpick that, but yeah.
Carolyn?
Just a quick question. This graph, Helen, that's got the internal borrowing in there as well.
Yes,
that's
correct.
in that. When you thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, so that left-hand axis, that's just how much of our headroom have we used up. So if you go back to 2016, you can see we were barely using 20% of our borrowing, and you can just see that shape's really changed. I guess I'm wanting to flag that with you so it's in the back of your mind, not only for the 250, 280 conversation or whatever, however you want to look at that, but also in terms of things like service delivery and projects and the have-to-dos versus the want-to-dos, and how the water projects sit in there as well. So it's just food for thought to build the picture.
Yep. Richard?
I just make a comment on the, if we were, since we're an internal business unit, we have the limit of our council limit, but if we were a standalone, if we were a CCO, the limit is a lot higher.
500.
500%. So.
Yeah.
So that's quite an important point. So that we need to understand that we need to really understand what our water costs are, because externally people their costs might not go up, but they're just borrowing to prop themselves up effectively.
And we are essentially borrowing for our renewals at the moment. We have been borrowing to do renewals. So, yeah, replacements are out of debt.
The thing to keep in mind, though, as well, is the 500% for a CCO is only on its own revenue. So one of the advantages for this community of having an internal business unit is there was more capacity for water borrowing as part of council's 250 or 280 than there was just of 500% of its own revenue, and that is true because so much of our debt is already proportionately skewed to water. Water rates would have been higher with a CCO that had the borrowing capacity of the 500% of its own revenue. That this was a cheaper way to deliver water for the community, because 250 and the 280 versus the 500 is not on the same revenue.
Richard?
So that not people who don't benefit from being on the district council's water and sewage services are actually their equities being used to prop up the other side. Is that correct?
That's essentially the decision council made when they've decided to opt for the internal business unit.
Phil?
Yeah, I was just going to counter Hamish's comment to the point that if we use all of that inverted commas equity or revenue from rates not related to water, means that we then can't do anything on other projects that are rates related to or not related to water. So I mean, you can't flog it both ways. We either take money out of one side and share it across the other, or we actually work as internal units and run them separately, and that's a decision that's still got to be made, I would have thought. But really will constrain what we do if we use all our ability to borrow against all revenue streams.
That is true, but you talk about an extreme where you're saying all equity and nothing, you can't do anything else. That isn't true. But it's utilising the strength of all of council's balance sheet or equity to deliver cheaper water than it otherwise would be. But it doesn't naturally flow that council can't do anything else and anything other than water because it's used all that capacity. That isn't true, and that's what this headroom is showing. Water is not using all of the capacity by any means. But it is certainly leaning on the strength of council's overall equity to keep water price a bit cheaper. That is true.
Right.
This graph's a bit easier. AP 27 on the far right hand side, I mentioned this figure to you earlier, the 12,360. So that's our total debt, so 183 mil. Actually, that's 27. I think that's a similar number as the divisor, but divided by 16,600 rating units. That's how that figure's calculated.
Phil?
Where would the inflation adjusted figure sit? Where would that line sit if we actually took the 216 figure and then put inflation over the top? Where would that sit, Helen?
That's a really tricky one because obviously what we borrow today isn't, the dollars are a lot higher than what they were 10 years ago, and the saying goes it's cheaper to do it today than it is in 10 years' time. I don't know. There'd be some good maths behind trying to work out what that would be.
A tripling in debt would worry me, which is what we're seeing.
Okay, this section now, we're just having a look at the rates, so similar process for what we've just done for debt, but having a look at the rates. Our current LTP caps rate increases through to 2029 at 10% per annum and then 5% thereafter, plus inflation. So the 9.15 that we set for 2027 is within that 10% cap that was sought through the LTP. So despite the legislation, the bill that came out yesterday, we do still need to, at this stage, prepare a cap for our rates increases through the long-term plan. So just have that in thought as we work through some of these numbers as well.
You've asked the question, a cap for waters and a cap for others, so is that something other councils are doing, putting a cap in for water if they've got a CCO?
I haven't seen that yet, but I think probably my direction there was obviously before yesterday, but the transparency around that, and we did do that with the last annual plan about this % of the rates increases for water and this is for non.
Yeah.
and it's possibly something to think about for debt as well as we work through it. I've got a section on the waters that will show you the increases as well for rates. For the cap anyway, with the bill, that's going to cap your non-waters. So
Yes, yeah.
but then we're not working to the bill necessarily. It's a really tricky place to play at the moment. Yeah, and I wouldn't. Your waters is going to be determined by your water services strategy at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Richard?
As the governors of the water, we have to govern our water services according to what is right and has to be done. We can't say we're only going to, because that's what councils did. Oh, we're only going to spend 5% a year. Wellington did that and said, oh, well, we won't put the pipes in. And that's not a separate water services plan. It'll charge what it has to charge, and that's it. It's not. We can't suddenly say, oh, we can't afford to do the water, we're not charging, because that's not an option.
No, and I think a hard cap for water will be impossible to live with because you're getting other inputs into your decision making, including the compliance from the Commerce Commission, and so you won't necessarily have a choice to live with a cap if you set it too low. What we are seeing, though, in the preparation of the current LTP is there are a range of improvements that our engineers might like to make to our water network, and good on them. But they may be still regarded as discretionary in terms of compliance. So they're improvements, they're efficiency gains, they're good ideas, but it's not true to say that they are required right now to comply. And so I think that's the judgment call that the governors of the Water Business Unit and Council will need to come to, is how much of the ongoing improvement of the network is required. And while a cap might not be the right mechanism because of pressure that will come from regulators, the idea that some of that work is limited in some way has merit to think about.
That's true. We decided as a community on a standalone business unit, and a standalone business unit by design is standalone, and it funds itself as a standalone business unit. It's not subsidised by council. That's probably the point I'm making. It's not we don't suddenly say, oh, since it's internal, we can steal a bit out of here and put it in there. I know we're allowed to, because I know you're going to say we're allowed to, but I don't think our community voted for that. They voted for a standalone business unit. And if that was mooted at the time that we were going to charge ratepayers that didn't get a benefit from the standalone business unit, there would have been a different outcome potentially at the time, because a standalone business unit means it stands on its own and does its own thing.
Absolutely, and that's exactly how we're planning to set it up, and that's exactly what we anticipate council will wish to do with it. And the only conversations I've been having with you about what ring fencing means is, in the end, ring fencing will be judged by the Commerce Commission, and they regard the ring fencing as a one-way ring fence. But that's not to say that we are setting it up for other ratepayers to contribute to the water service. We're setting it up so that it is self-funding.
This is a graph of the average rates per ratepayer. You can see AP 2027, the 3686 that I referred to earlier. So that accounts for inflation in the sense that there's inflation year on year for those prices. I haven't peeled that back to show what that would look like without inflation on there. So the average over that 12-year period is 6.7%.
Carolyn?
Helen, this excludes regional rates?
Yes, it's ADC rates. This graph looks at our total rates revenue, which is modelled against the left-hand axis, and then the line graph is the rates increase. So I think you can see the picture over that. The last 10, 11 years, it's kind of a bit up and down, and in an ideal world, you'd want that to be pretty constant. But I don't think I've seen any council with a nice line across there. It very much responds to the economic climate and council deliverables and the like. And you can see there 2020, 21, COVID times as well. So
That's right. The 2021 was an arbitrary increase based on the the uncertainty of the economy, and council agreed to the 2.5% rate increase. It wasn't based on the work program or the actual kind of agreed level of service need. It was an arbitrary number to help the community, and you can see the catch up post that sort of decision is real.
And I remember that debate. I think it was the first motion was for a 0% increase. We got it up to 2.5, 2.5. Yeah. Cool.
So this graph is an extension of the one that you've just seen. So the left-hand side is essentially what you've just seen, but then I've overlaid the LTP on there as well. So with the bars in the middle where you've got that double overlay of bars, you can see the blue is the actual, and then the turquoise is what we set in the long-term plan. So with those, the last 2 years essentially, current year and last year, we set the rates at a level below what we said we were going to do in the long-term plan. And the dotted line shows the rates increases that were projected for the long-term plan. So you could see in those latter years, we forecast at that point in time that it would taper off to sort of around 4 or 5% per annum in terms of increases.
Richard?
I believe in learning from your mistakes or your decisions of the past. So by deferring it in 2021, you deferred it, you didn't eliminate it by saying 2.5 was great at the time, great for that council, look how great we are and that. But 2 years later, the chickens come home to roost. So I think, it's easy to defer stuff, but someone's got to pay somewhere.
Phil?
I guess I'm struggling to understand that we've got a graph on the left-hand side, red full lines that is going in an upward trajectory, and we've got a dotted line that's defying gravity. So what are we doing differently to achieve that target? What was our expectation that we were going to do differently to actually meet that long-term plan? Because to me, those two lines just
It's essentially less new projects. Because remember, rates increases build on the rates from the previous year. So if an increase drops, it's not necessarily that you've made dramatic savings in the current level of activity. It means that you're not proposing the same growth that you were when you had the previous increase. So it simply means, and a big part of that in my recollection is the completion of the major upgrades to the water treatment plants. So water is a significant part in the growth of debt, the growth of rates, and that big compliance work, developing all the new water treatment plants and new systems, has come to an end with the around about now. They're essentially largely done. Now, there's a lot of work still to remain compliant and to keep improving, but the big capital cost has largely been incurred under the current rules. We've still got Ocean Farm, we've still got pieces to sort out, but largely that work has been done, but at cost.
Yeah, I must be short of sleep, but the cynic in me in my previous life would say if I looked at that from a farm performance point of view and there was suddenly a major inflection, I would say what's changed, and that's a huge change. And I understand that we may have completed some of the water projects, but I am not sure that we've completed the water projects, because our expectations, our community's expectations will continue to drive upwards, not downwards, and that'll be added cost. So, I mean,
I don't disagree. I think that expectation is real, and that may well be what happens. But at the time of doing the LTP, we weren't contemplating continuing to develop activities to the same scale as we had in the recent past. So yes, the pressure will be what it will be in the future, but at the time of the LTP, that's the thing proposed.
I guess I'll get it beaten out of me in the next few months, but to me, we've actually got to have an LTP that's realistic as well.
That's right.
And to me, I look at that and I go, I'm not sure. And I'm sorry for those that were involved in it, but when I look at that data, I'm going, this is a monumental change.
Richard?
I'll respond to that in that every LTP that's ever done, the first 3 years are certain, as the Chief Executive said, and the next are a wish list of wants or not know. And so I think it's always been the same way. Your long-term plan of 10 years might contemplate a few big projects, but it doesn't contemplate many because politically, every council who gets in looks at 3 years and we want to do this. Whereas the last council can't look year 7 to 9 and say, what are you expecting to do? So there'll always be a drop-off like that.
That has certainly tended to be the case here, and I would expect in every council the work program is heavily front-loaded. Despite all the planning, all the asset management plans, all the infrastructure strategies, all the things coming, we try and program those sensibly with all that work. But the pressure comes on to do things now, and therefore it tends to load the earlier years of the LTP.
Right. Have you got a few more slides, Helen?
About 27.
More. We're just starting. Good stuff. Okay.
I told you I love this stuff.
Yeah, you do, don't you? No, that's right. We'll keep going, and we'll have a break for a couple of about
Yeah, I've got
10:30
about
maybe.
4 or 5 slides on the water, so
Okay.
maybe we do that first.
Yeah, sounds good. 27.
Sorry. So this section is just giving a bit of thought to the Water Services Delivery Plan, which will turn into the Water Services Strategy. I mentioned earlier the inflation figures, so council overall running at 2.2 for 2028. Waters is forecast to be higher at 2.7. There are a couple of other sort of things we really need to give serious consideration through the financial strategy as well in terms of water. Three Waters depreciation funding, and I've got some slides later on around depreciation funding, but just for waters alone we have unfunded depreciation of $5.1 million. We're only funding $2.5 million in this current year and last year for waters depreciation, so around about a third. There's also the balanced budget benchmark, which you may or may not have seen in both the annual plan and the annual report, sitting at 91.9% for last year. That's a straight calculation between money in, money out from an income expenditure point of view, not a capital expenditure point of view, so it takes into account depreciation. So sitting at the 91.9 reflects a chunk of that unfunded depreciation as well, and as I mentioned, I've got a section on that, so we'll have a look a bit closer. But it's food for thought in terms of how much renewal funding do we do and how do we pay for the CapEx in Three Waters as well. So this graph looks at rates for Three Waters and non-waters. So you can see the blue, dark blue is the water rates that we have billed and we forecast through the Water Services Delivery Plan, with other council rates on top in the turquoise. And I stopped at 27 because I didn't want to speculate what the other rates would look like, but also it just didn't feel right overlaying the LTP figures in there because things have changed. The line there is the average percentage increase for waters, so the water rates increase. not total rates, just waters. So I added this graph in last night after the announcement yesterday, just to give you a feel for rates increases of water versus non-water. This isn't their strict calculation, so it doesn't account for the growth in terms of the number of rating units. It's just a straight out dollar percentage increase in rates. Not sure whether or not it does tell a story, to be honest, because there's quite a bit of a mix there. I think what it does really say is that rates increases that we've looked at from the previous graph, it does hide whether it's waters or non-waters in terms of the increase though, because you can see some big ones in waters, drops and increases.
Richard?
You just mentioned, Helen, that I know you're going to get depreciation, we're underfunding it. With that, we rely on our water services plan being like the Bible that we have to comply with. So are we complying with it?
Yes, the plan was to borrow but ramp that funding in over a period of time. It was unaffordable to do it from day one.
Because that's the key to, we can, as long as we're compliant, because it's fully audited and it's everything done with it. So it's the key to our waters, isn't it?
Yeah.
Phil?
But you can be a Wellington very quickly if you hide stuff. So, I mean, to me, we've actually got to look here and say, what is the life expectancy of that system? And I guess, Helen, you're going to come forward with that with your depreciation schedule. But I mean, if we fiddle around with depreciation and say, oh, well, we've met our targets, but we haven't allowed depreciation, then sooner or later, our grandchildren and their grandchildren are going to have problems. And that's the bit that we're trying to foresee. So, I mean, let's not hide some of those things.
No, we certainly won't hide them. What we do fund is our renewal program. Which is the actual work proposed to maintain the network, as opposed to currently funding depreciation, which of course is a theoretical accounting process to show the wear on the network in a theoretical sense. What we are doing is funding the renewal program. So they're not quite the same thing, and funding depreciation will require significantly higher rates charges, and will obviously create more capacity to renew faster or earlier, but we are renewing the network and are doing that each year.
With respect, if we have a depreciation which is twice the capital that we are putting into capital expenditure we're putting in, we are underfunding the asset, and that is my point.
Richard?
Yeah, probably I could respond to that the previous Three Waters model was using the Scottish model, which had depreciation. I think it was a 40-year lifespan was of the water pipes, which meant that your depreciation was a lot higher because the asset was only predicted to last 40%, therefore you had to have more depreciation, whereas we have many assets that are still totally fit for purpose at 40 years, so that there is a balance between the asset life that was, it's easy to say everything's going to be replaced every 40 years. Well, you just can't afford to do that, so it's as long as your strength of your water services plan is well engineered and well thought out, you're all right.
That's right. The real the balance between those concepts, as I say, depreciation is a calculation of how the network is being used up, if you like, or wearing out. The balance is to have great asset and information so that you can be renewing the network as it's needed because of the information that you have. So you need great information to focus on the renewals and the way in which we currently fund. But clearly, where there's a significant gap between depreciation and renewal program, the discussion of underfunding is a very legitimate conversation.
This graph really talks to the conversation that we had 5 minutes ago around what Phil raised, and the waters CapEx, and this is out of the LTP for those latter years. You can see that the CapEx was kind of front loaded and did taper off. So this will be redrawn through the water services strategy for what the new CapEx program will look like. This is the graph that we looked at previously around the debt caps with how much we borrow. Previously, we looked at all of council borrowing. What you're seeing here is split between waters and non-waters. So your waters debt is the blue, and you can see that ramp up through the last few years. And then I've taken the water services delivery plan for just to model it out further. And then I've just maintained existing borrowing for other council because that is yet unknown. But you can see sort of where it's getting pretty close in 2028 to that 250% cap and the contribution that water makes to that.
Richard?
From the water services delivery plan, we're actually over the 250% in those years, aren't we? We are, you know, if you were a standalone business was 250%, we're actually higher than that through those years, and that goes to the point that at 250 we're using some of the equity in the rest of the council to smooth that out, which is not wrong, but I'm just saying we are using that.
Yeah, well, I don't think we've done, I haven't seen that work. The relevant comparator would be 500% though, not 250, because if we'd gone to a CCO, water could borrow 500% of its water revenue. But I haven't seen that calculation, Helen. I don't know whether you've done it in theory. What's the total water revenue and what would 500% debt allow? But when council made the decision to establish the business unit, we knew that we would have had to have put the water rates up to create enough debt borrowing capacity at 500% to do the work that the water service delivery plan required. So that's where the revenue, i.e. the water rates, is not being driven by solely by the operating costs for that year or the debt servicing costs, and it was being driven by the need to live within a debt cap. So the revenue had to go up so you could have a higher cap so that you could get the work done. And that was why a CCO indicated more expensive water rates than the business unit.
So I'm seeing just under 20 million from one of the previous graphs for water's rate revenue.
And so the debt headroom is 500% of
So 100
that
mil.
revenue. So 100 million. So we could have 100 million of water debt through that CCO structure.
And we're sitting at 94.5 for 2027 annual plan.
So the headroom was much tighter, and as work was ongoing, you would need that's why the rates needed to go up to create the headroom for the necessary CapEx borrowing.
I'd like to just to if we could, in some part of the morning, we could see page 54 of our water services plan, because I think it does explain that in there, and it's a lot higher than what it is 500%. If I've got my figures right, I'd just like to check that I have got them right.
Okay, well, we could maybe look at that after a cuppa, maybe, unless you've got it.
That's a good break point for now.
It is a break point now.
Yep.
Okay, let's have 10 minutes and then we'll come back to the rest of the slides. Thank you. Helen, hand over to you. So comparing ourselves with peers, with our peers, good.
Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, I have looked at numbers from 4 of our neighbouring councils and 6 similar sized councils to us in terms of rating, when I say similar size, rating unit size. So just the stats for us, just so you sort of picture who we are and where we sit when I show you the comparatives. 16,600 rating units, almost 37,000 population. Population growth, these were from 25 stats, I think, from memory. 1.9%, land area 6181, and AA plus on our credit rating. So I've gone and pulled back those stats from our peer councils as well, and apologies, it probably is quite small, particularly along the bottom. But for comparisons for our neighbours, I've picked up Waitaki, Timaru, Waimak and Selwyn. So you can see across the top we would sit at number 2, so 1 smaller, 3 bigger. Those are presented in rating unit size across the top. And then the 6 councils across the bottom for our comparators. So South Taranaki at 14,500 rating units, Manawatu 15,180 rating units, Whakatane 13,304. So remember we were 16,600.
16,304.
Yep, sorry, did I say 13? Yeah. 16,304. We then sit in the middle between Whakatane and Matamata. So Matamata at 16,660, Horowhenua 18,996, and Taupo at 24,297.
Carolyn, you got a question?
Yeah, why are some councils, and I'm looking specifically at Waitaki, why are they unrated?
They simply choose not to do so.
Oh, you don't have to do it.
There is a cost to being rated, and there's kind of a break-even point depending on how much debt you've got and the cost of being rated to the reduced borrowing costs for your interest rates. So it's about doing that assessment of whether it's worth being rated for how much you borrow.
Okay, thank you.
So you said our growth rate was 1.9%. So if we got a higher growth rate than Waimakariri?
At the time these stats were done, these stats came through, I think it was the DIA numbers that was done in 25, they're online, that we submitted all the information to.
Yeah, I'm surprised with that because I thought Waimak had high growth. Richard?
Our land area is a hard one because we have a big lump of, if you look at our map, hills in up the top end, compared to, I looked at Matamata Piako, it doesn't have any Southern Alps mountains, so just the land area one, you take it with a grain of salt, wouldn't you, effectively, because some of ours is pretty extensive high country.
I wonder if the K's of roading would be an interesting comparison to put in as well, because we've got a lot of, we're high up there. Are we 4th?
I think we might be 5th now. I think Selwyn
Yeah.
did another subdivision, and they've got slightly longer roading length now than us. Southland had by far the largest roading network of any council. We've been in that sort of top 4 or 5 for many years.
Yes.
So
Russell?
Just interestingly, with Waitaki, there are only 2,500 less rating units, but what are we? 13,000 less people, which maybe is a lot of holiday homes and various things through there. Maybe that relates to that. I don't know, but it just seems a big difference, doesn't it?
Yeah, Richard.
Could we chuck out land area and put roading in? Because the roading one would actually be it's a big cost to a council. It doesn't matter how much land you've got, but if you've got roads, that's the cost that council has to bear. So a council that has a lot of roading, it's a big proportion, to compare councils.
We can do anything that you would find useful. Just remembering with roading that each council has a different FAR rate. So you might see a particular length of network and make assumptions about the cost to that council, but it won't necessarily be accurate if they get a substantially different FAR rate. And I think there's a council not far from here, further south, it's maybe 64 or 65% FAR rate, whereas we're 51.
Yeah.
So the length of the roading network is not. You just got to take it for what it is. It's an indication of something, but it's not necessarily a direct correlation with cost.
So just in terms of those stats, the rating units are the numbers from 2027 annual plans, where I got those. So those are the latest. Population is from 2024, and the population growth is 23 to 24.
Okay. So Waimakariri could have, changed, because, okay.
So what I've done here is I've benchmarked our rates, which are the gold colours in the middle, against all of those comparative councils. The line that I've run across is our 2027 average rate. So you can see that we are the cheapest of the group for 2027. Cheapest isn't the right word, is it? The lowest.
Lowest
Average. Sorry, apologies. Some of the other stats. So our increase from 26 to 27 was above the average increase, which was around about 5% for the average, but that was also from a lower base.
So Waitaki had you've accounted for their 22%, no, it's gone down now, hasn't it, 16 or 17% rate increase.
That's included in there,
yeah,
in the Waitaki numbers.
Yeah. Richard?
So that includes water?
I was just going to say the Selwyn rate there doesn't include their water. That's why I've kind of faintly coloured it and why it drops.
Because everybody has to understand that a rating unit in Selwyn, majority of them are houses in Rolleston, not even quarter, 235 square metre sections with 110 house on it. Well, that's pretty much the guts of it.
Pretty much,
whereas here, our rating unit average would be a lot bigger because we have a lot of farms, which disproportionately, our spread is probably very large from our value of our rating units from top to bottom, whereas some towns it'll be quite tight together, their value of rating unit.
Yeah, look, that's right. And so comparisons are always of passing interest rather than some scientific analysis of exact comparators. So you can find all the differences that you want with those comparators, but across the board, the individual differences start to have less impact. So the more comparison you do, the greater the number of councils you compare yourself to, the more perhaps the more validity those comparisons have. We've often thought of particularly the Manawatu and Whakatane as being very similar sort of size councils to ourselves. Perhaps Horowhenua is in that camp as well. They have a makeup that is pretty similar to ours from what we can see from the outside, and but it's there more for interest than anything, and it continually reminds us that while affordability is a significant matter and shouldn't be dismissed lightly, the level of rates in the Ashburton district is not comparatively high compared to many other councils.
And I think you had a question in there saying, are these the right councils to compare ourselves to? And I think it is worth having your neighbours plus the likes of Whakatane or Matamata, which are reasonably similar to us. Yeah. Russell?
And average rateable value, or however they obtain their rating income, is also an interesting one, because like maybe Whakatane, the average house value's 930,000 compared to ours, hence theirs is higher just because of that as much as anything else. And maybe, don't know.
I'd possibly not in that case, because I think remember the individual property's value is just how you share the pie. So I don't think you can compare values and assume rates will be different because of that. It's what the proportionate value is of your property in your district, which will dictate how much rates you pay.
Right.
So similar graph, this is net debt. So not total debt, but net debt, because I needed to take it from their financial statements. We're the gold colour in the middle again. You can see with Matamata, Piako and Selwyn, that's a result of their three waters moving out. So we're pretty much sitting middle of the pack with our debt.
And interesting, Waitaki, quite low, aren't they? But we saw some of those figures when we were going through our the simplifying local government stuff as well, didn't we? No questions on that? No. Oh, you, Richard?
So it's net debt, but it doesn't take into account assets then, does it?
No.
So I think if
they've got cash assets, yes.
They own a port like Timaru, the port's on as an asset against debt, so that we just have to be careful that we think we're low debt, but if we owned a massive asset, that would be big, and if we didn't own it, well, exactly. So
all those differences are masked by doing these averages. It's just a snapshot in time, just an impression, just to give you a feel for where we sit, but there'll be reasons for the differences.
Carolyn?
That's the $12,360 net debt you mentioned earlier per rateable unit. What is the forecast net debt per rateable unit, for at the peak at 27-28, do you know?
I haven't done that because there's just so many variables in there.
Yeah, okay.
I'll probably just leave it at that, because the Water Services Delivery Plan, LTP, hasn't landed where we said it was. The reserves work, we're in a bit of a different space.
Yeah, because it would be, I think we know what it is now, but that's almost,
I
that's
think,
gone now, isn't it? That's
the trick is to do this modelling again once we build those LTP budgets, and we will do, because we'll need to look at what the limits are and how we sit against those.
Because I think that's quite a meaningful measure. Yeah.
You've also got to make assumptions of future subdivisions, because the rateable properties changes as well. So it's a different piece of work as you look into the future.
Richard?
because of the 4% rate cap, we should be reporting our water debt separate to our other council debt, because that does show that, what we're attributing to that, because our water debt is quite high. It's 113 million or somewhere there of our total debt, where our total debt is actually quite low for the rest of the district. So we need to understand those if we're going to, because we're talking about how do we fund and what do we do forward. If we know that our water debt's very high, well, if we're going to not subsidise, we're going to help that spread over time, that's fine, but we need to understand that that's what we're doing. We're not sort of just, we're not in total debt for things we've bought outside of water.
Yeah, I agree.
Phil?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting graph you've put there, Helen, and it would add more flavour in terms of contingent liabilities, in terms of what we did for the Head Start program as well. I know you can't do that, but it might actually show some of those lines in quite a different light. And I guess, to me, the thing that stood out is when you took water services in inverted commas off Matamata and Selwyn, then things changed dramatically, and I think that might sharpen everyone's focus as well. So it'd be good to be able to get that down the track.
And this is just the last graph I've got in this section for you. So I've taken the debt and the rates, plotted against the axes there. And the size of the blob is the size of the council in terms of rating units. So we are just hiding there in the middle in the black. And you can see where all the other councils are sitting.
Oh, no, interesting. Any questions? No.
When we work through the budgets, we make assumptions around using inflators, and generally, I think pretty much every council across New Zealand would use Burl in some way, shape, or form as an inflator across their budgets. And it can also be used as part of your cap for your rates increase as well. You can refer to the Burl numbers that are there as well. So I thought it was worth just giving you a bit of understanding on Burl and then having a quick look at the numbers that are draft. So we have just in the past week or so got a set of draft numbers, and they will be finalised with updated figures as we work through the budgets. We usually get the final figures around about mid-October, so they should be ready to feed into the numbers that you do see through the budgeting process. I think probably in a nutshell, I could walk you through every little bit of the methodology of how they calculate the local government cost index. That's LGCI. I think it's probably worth just saying that it's really, really thorough. There are a huge amount of inputs that go into that. So there's 12 input price indices that you see on the left-hand side. They look at private sector wage movements, local government wage movements as well, because those costs both feed in. They then go and weight the baskets as well by looking at council spend. So they've actually gone back and had a look at how council spends, what they deliver, and collect that up nationally to actually weight the baskets to come up with a total. So when I talk about the 2.2 LGCI as an average, that's made up of different weightings of the baskets, and each of those baskets in terms of services like planning or roading, transport, waste, water, they actually have layers underneath them as well as to the inputs in those baskets, whether it's CapEx, OpEx, labour. And I'll jump to the next screen, the slide that shows you. So each of the different categories that they produce for us that sit underneath that total is the planning and reg, roading, transport, community activities, waste and environmental, and water. And then the colour of those bars that are there just shows you the feed inputs into those for the weighting. So you can see the likes of planning and reg have a lot higher labour-based input than something like roading, for example, where there's a lot more capital input. And that just really reflects the way that councils deliver those activities, the costs that go into those activities.
All good, no questions?
You will get a copy of these slides.
Yeah, thank you.
So here is just a table of the draft indicators that they've given to us. So the second to last column along, total, the 2.2 for 2028, that's what I've been referring to today. You can see those numbers just running down that total is all sitting around about that 2 ballpark in terms of inflation. Waters, you can see initially is definitely higher. they always come with a bit of a rider over the top in terms of their forecasts. I guess they're saying they don't have a crystal ball, as we know. They're aware of the higher oil prices, which are built into that, but they're seeing the stymied economic growth and so on, which is keeping some of the other costs down as well. They do remind us that we should be prepared for volatility. I guess that's a bit of butt covering in there. We didn't know COVID was coming. COVID changed things. You never know what's around the corner. So whilst we have 10 years of inflators in terms of actually being here in 10 years' time and saying what did those rates look like, you can guarantee they'll be different. But these are robustly calculated and generally accepted by Audit New Zealand in terms of an inflator to use for the long-term plan. Richard?
This does assume, though, doesn't it, that the world settled down a bit, doesn't it? That's what they're all assuming, the oil price settles down and that sort of thing. But as of today, you would have said that's not happening.
They're saying that they're acknowledging the price shock and they've built that in.
Yeah.
But they've not provided for any unknown volatility because they don't know when or what.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
Phil?
So that's our LGCI, the Local Government Cost Index.
Yes, yep.
Thank you.
And it's very different basket of goods essentially to CPI. Yeah, which is what the public is very aware of. They understand CPI, they don't understand LGCI. Cost of building a road is very different to going and buying your bread and milk.
Yeah, and that's the point, because the people paying the rates, the community, are living in a world where the CPI is more relevant, but we're facing costs that aren't related to the same cost pressures. And I heard someone say, described it as councils don't buy bananas. And so that's why there is a difference between the cost pressure we face and the CPI. But of course the community is living in a world where the CPI is relevant, and therefore affordability clashes with the cost pressures that council face.
Yeah, I get there may be a difference. However, over time, it should smooth itself out. It should do, because actually you agreed that you're not buying bananas, but you're actually forcing the banana growers to grow for a lower price. And so why would we not be forcing the contractors to do it for a lower price? It's the same argument applies. And so, yeah, it's a difficult, I mean, I'm not going to go there. It's a difficult argument, but yeah, I'll leave it at that.
This section is on depreciation funding and renewals. So I've mentioned earlier in terms of our unfunded depreciation in 26-27, we funded 14.3 million and unfunded just under 10 million. And the biggest gap in that unfunding is sitting in Three Waters at 5.1 million. So funding depreciation is a choice, but it's also balanced with prudence. We have the balanced budget benchmark, which is the next section that we'll look at, and the expectation that we hit 100%, which is essentially fully funding depreciation, but depreciation isn't a cash cost. So it is all about striking a balance on how you pay for your renewals, the volume of the renewals, intergenerational equity, so who pays, when they pay. So we'll just have a look at some of those concepts, and
I'll just go to Carolyn's question first.
You might just begin to touch on it now. Are you going to, how much do we depreciate our roads by, like, or are you going to go over that now? And water, like that big?
not at that level, so I'm trying to keep this at a strategic level, overarching. When we do budgets, we'll get the renewals forecast.
Yeah, okay, yeah, that would be, yeah.
Essentially a 30-year period, and that will largely be the driver around the cash cost of renewing those assets.
Because some of them may not be a significant percentage of
And bear in mind too, with specifically roading, for the subsidised roads, we recognise the full depreciation expense in our financial statements, the non-cash cost, but we get that subsidy back, 51%. So you
Yeah.
actually don't need to provide for all of your
No.
renewal.
That's right.
Sorry,
Exactly.
your
that was my
cash.
question.
Yeah.
So I'm just going
Yeah,
to
and
just
then I'll go to Richard,
say,
yeah.
when you think about depreciation, the two key things to think about is the value of the asset and the length of time over which you're depreciating it, and that dictates the depreciation amount. And that's why audit, when they come, spend a considerable amount of time examining the assumptions around the valuation of your assets, a lot of energy on the value of those assets, and then the time it takes to depreciate. And that's why we say earlier it's a proxy for the renewals program, but it isn't exact because it includes significant assumptions about your network that are unrelated to the state of the network.
Richard?
One of the assumptions you talked about before was the water being depreciated not to the full speed that it could be on that. I talk about those so many years. And if you look at our water services plan, the first 5 years we're in a very positive place of depreciation. We spent a lot of money on it, but the second 5 years we've assumed that we spent enough in the first 5 to not have to invest a lot more. It goes positive and then it goes negative in depreciation. And I think that goes to Councillor Everest's point before, that we assume then that everything's going to stay steady as it is now, but if a different government got in and they decided that our water wasn't blue enough, as an example, and we had to make it bluer, that would cost us a substantial amount of money in our water services, so that would add a lot more depreciation as it was, because our assets wouldn't be good enough. So that's the risk of a 10-year plan. The second 5, you can assume what you assume today, but the chances are you'll be light probably on what you need to do.
That's why we redo it every 3 years at least. This slide really is just going back to some of the basics around depreciation. We touched on this. Depreciation is a non-cash cost. We're required to account for it through our accounting standards. We don't go and physically pay somebody that amount of money. So if we didn't renew any assets, we wouldn't need to fund any depreciation. So when it comes to how much do we fund, we need to look what our renewal profiles are. So how much cash do we actually need to go and pay to renew those assets in the future and charge people over time for the cost of those assets. So when we're looking at fully funding, we're really looking at fully funding renewals, not fully funding depreciation. And that's where a bit of tension comes in with that balanced budget benchmark, which is including a non-cash cost but expecting you to cover those cash costs. You're not required necessarily to cover 100% on your balanced benchmark if there's a prudent reason why. So an example is a hull that you're not going to replace. You're just going to run it to the ground, you're going to sweat it and then not replace it. That's a prudent decision that you've made not to fund depreciation on that asset because you've made the decision not to renew it. Another one is with your roading that we've just talked about. You get subsidy against 50% of those, 51% of those renewals. You don't need to rate fund for that 51% of that renewal component because you get the subsidy on that.
Russell?
Thank you. You just used the halls as an example, but if I go to elderly persons housing, have we been doing depreciation on those because they're of an age now where we know we need to spend some money on them? So in that property area, how's that working?
I don't think there's been a robust methodology behind it. I think it's been about funding a renewal program and possibly around tenants moving out and being able to renew them rather than maintaining the asset. Yeah. This is just a purely theoretical graph, just around that concept of 30-year renewal funding. So you look at what that spending is going to be over that 30-year period, and those are just done in 5-year blocks there, just to bulk up the numbers to get some averages. And you can see from the bars that the spending is front-loaded, the spending declines. The gold line through the middle is let's charge those ratepayers the same amount per annum, so we're not introducing rating shocks in there. We're not suddenly cranking up rates up and down as the curve moves. We're charging people a fair price year on year for the cost of renewing those assets. And as we do that, the reserve balance in those latter years, that's the green dotted line, builds up because we're not spending as much, and then you'd expect that then to come into a curve of more spending on renewals to use up those as well. So it's okay for your depreciation reserves to be in surplus or in deficit with a robust renewal program and funding strategy behind it. And once again, you'd reassess that program and that reserve balance every 3 years, because you may have some renewals that you didn't anticipate doing in year 3, they were scheduled for year 10. You still draw on your renewal reserve, your depreciation reserve, to replace that asset. It just means you're doing it in year 3, not year 10, and because you're replacing those renewal funding on an average basis, you're still going to catch that funding requirement.
Richard?
What's the reserves what is the water reserves balance at the moment? Because this is one of the big ones. Water's the big depreciation asset.
The actual?
Yeah, the actual just today, to give us an idea, because that makes perfect sense. But if you start off at 0 or minus.
I'm pretty sure they're overdrawn.
Yeah, so effectively the green line at the moment is below 0, so it's actually got to actually do some stuff to get to to get your curve.
As we work through the LTP budgets, water in particular, waters, is going to need some careful decisions around balancing the renewal program and how it's funded and the quantum of depreciation that we're funding compared to the amount of rates that we charge. I don't think there's an ability to fund from day one the amount of depreciation that we need for our forecast renewals from an affordability rating shock perspective. So I think we'll need to look at modelling some ramping in for you, and that's what has been done through the Water Services Delivery Plan. That ramps the depreciation funding in, and we'll just do a new cast on that to see what those numbers look like.
Richard?
Just to put that in perspective, we've got a forecasted about 10% average over the next 4 or 5 years of rate increases due to water. Water increases in the Water Services Plan. Is that correct? So, we've
Can't remember, I'm
forecasted
sorry. Yeah.
in the Water Services Plan, the increases are consistently 10% for the next 3 or 4 years. So that's something that we need to really understand. If water's going 10%, the rest of the rates are going 4. That's still about a 7% increase in general rates across the whole lot.
Just in terms of talking about waters, and I think we tend to talk about water and wastewater, but stormwater does have a sizable reserve balance of around about $3 million.
Hamish, did you want to add something? No.
So in terms of the approach for the last LTP, it's actually stated in the financial strategy that the equipment at EA Networks would be funded in terms of the renewal funding, the depreciation funding. Te Whare Whakatere was set as a $120,000 increase year on year for funding depreciation. So the current year that we're in, we are funding $240,000 worth of depreciation. And it's okay to take that approach because we're actually acknowledging that we've got the debt servicing requirement on that as well. When we come back with the LTP, we've also done a piece of work around our 3 big properties for what those renewal forecasts look like, and that will be fed into this model as well in terms of how much renewal funding do we need to maintain our assets going forward. The LTP also referred to hall depreciation specifically, and that we would rate for repairs and renewals rather than providing depreciation funding in buckets to be drawn on. So it would just be year on year as required.
So that's just for memorial halls, or all halls, is it, Tony?
The LTP was just a blanket halls.
Okay.
So, yeah. I think it's all halls. yeah.
Righto.
I guess the downside of just paying for what's due now is you're probably hiding those future costs, and those ratepayers aren't covering the cost of the asset that they're using. But it's a really fine line that you're trying to balance between affordability, intergenerational equity, renewals, levels of service. And that's where you essentially get to make all of those decisions. And that's really what that slide represents now in terms of balancing that affordability and the intergenerational equity and the levers that you can pull to balance that where it feels the right decision to make. And there is no right answer around it.
Any questions on that slide? Yeah. Richard?
I just really want to point out that the water is at 500% net debt. That's what our water is, even though it's an internal business, we are at 500%. So to say that water is being, you could say we are at the point where any further we'll be mortgaging our future just to keep our rates down for today. So I think because we talked about 250 net debt, well, we look at water, it's going to get to 500% debt to revenue. So if I would have thought any greater than that, Helen, you could comment, any greater than 500% net to debt, you're at the point in time where you're not charging enough now compared to the debt you're carrying.
Hamish?
Possibly, but 500 is just an arbitrary number too. It's not a magical number. It's the number that the LGFA agreed they would lend up to if you were a water CCO. So that's how 500 was created. It's not kind of some legendary number that equals anything other than what the LGFA agreed to.
Getting there.
It's all really good information, so yeah.
The balanced budget benchmark, it's a statutory requirement under the Section 100 test through the legislation, and we do report in the annual plan based on the annual plan budgets, and then that's reported back in the annual report each year. So we're currently sitting at 91.9% for the 2027 annual plan. And the main driver behind that is that depreciation funding, because depreciation is expense, so non-cash, remember, is part of that calculation. So the calculation for the balanced budget is how much operating revenue are we getting in and how much operating expense is going out. If we just jump to the next slide. So the main driver is around the unfunded depreciation and potentially legitimate reasons or decisions around that. I think of this building in itself, depreciation per annum is around about 1.3 mil. This year we're funding 240 of that. So there's $1 million worth of your gap straight off just around depreciation funding on this building. You've got your roading network. I think depreciation is around about $7.2 million. You're getting subsidy against that component, so you're not going to fund it. You're recognising the revenue obviously as subsidy, and you're not going to fund the OPEX for the depreciation. I guess counter to that too, you also get subsidy for your CAPEX that's coming into that equation. But is below the line in terms of the calculation because it's going out against CAPEX. The other component of that, which I've seen through looking at the financials, is around the reserve funding. So we have historically drawn on a lot of reserves to fund essentially operating costs to subsidise the rate requirement, and that has had an impact historically on that balanced budget benchmark as well. So every time you use your rates contributor, for example, and also the property reserve, which is a bit of a, it's okay in the sense that you've got property reserve funding the property activity because that's the way it works, but it also feeds into the equation and blurs it, I guess, in terms of that 91.9 number that's coming out. But when you're drawing down on the property reserve or other reserves to fund your core operational expenditure, that's where it's dropping it below the 100% as well. So if we lift the funding of depreciation in the long-term plan, you will see this balanced budget benchmark increase. And there'll obviously be decisions around the use of reserves too. But just a reminder as well that it isn't compulsory for you to hit that 100% benchmark as long as you're making prudent decisions around why not. So you can explain clearly and to audit as well what is that gap and why. So this slide just looks at 4 levers to close that gap for the balanced budget benchmark. So we've talked about the depreciation funding and lifting that, and it's okay to phase that in if that's the right decision. Looking at growing non-rates revenue, so fees and charges potentially would help close that gap. The levels of service, which undoubtedly we will be doing through the LTP process. If you're reducing your OPEX, then you are closing the gap. And also we touched on the renewals program. So you reduce your renewals, you're reducing your depreciation, you don't hold the assets, and then you don't need to fund them either. Just wanted to touch on disaster and resilience, and not in terms of how we respond to events, but how we provide for them from a contingency perspective. It's something that is required through the financial strategy to address how we would respond to funding disasters. We spend just over $1.6 million a year on insurance. That's our main cover in terms of responding to disasters. The last LTP also referred to potential reliance on central government to cover for disaster costs as well. And the other method that was in the last LTP in the financial strategy was around the ability to draw down debt to recover from disaster costs. And we know when we've looked at our debt limits today and the headroom in there that we need some careful decisions in this space as well.
Carolyn?
Thank you. Thanks, Helen. With regards to disaster, I mean, I know you cannot predict a disaster, but is there like a table that you can look up your risk and your disaster likelihood and sort of get the best bang for your buck, if you like? Is there some sort of disaster forecasting tool?
Called insurance.
Yeah, there must be. Actuaries must do it in insurance.
Well, that's how insurance comes about, isn't it? But, yeah, I'd be rich if I could do that.
That would be so good, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
But this is one way, with the rates capping, like this is one way that you could apply for an exemption if around disasters. Was that right?
Yep.
Yeah.
But then you'd need the headroom there as well, wouldn't you? Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, there's no right answer really, or no wrong answer either. So it's how much risk we're willing to carry, and that's in the way of assets that we potentially choose not to insure. How much headroom have we got if we use debt to cover? So when we're thinking about the LTP budgets and delivery of that and the forecast of debt, do we or should we leave headroom in there for disaster? And if so, how much should that be? There's also the counter to that, and how much should we invest in our LTP budgets to mitigate against that, so to provide a more resilient community through our infrastructure, but that again comes at a cost. In terms of service levels, if a disaster was to hit our community, what is the tolerance for downtime for those assets or services to be reinstated? So really, what's the mix of insurance, reserves, and debt potentially that we would use in the future to fund an unknown disaster of an unknown amount?
Richard, you got a question?
Isn't that a good example north? Because, you know, Christchurch had an earthquake and they've been through this exact, you know, scenario and borrowed to bring new infrastructure, water, and we have roading risk of, you know, flooding and knocking a bridge or two out or whatever, and we have earthquake risk for our infrastructure. And some of the other stuff you would have to say, if the domain had a earthquake through it, you would repair it, but it's not life or limb if Carolyn can't walk through the park. If her toilet doesn't flush, that's probably just a bit more serious.
You know, I think your point is valid through me, Liz. I think the issue is always, though, that it's not quite clear how central government is going to stand beside you in these events. And yes, it's true, Christchurch renewed a lot of their horizontal infrastructure, but the government itself put, I think, was it $2 billion of government money into those repairs that the city didn't have to find and pay back. And I know our friends in the Hawke's Bay through Cyclone Gabriel did not expect to have to compensate landowners for some of the damage that cyclone caused, and that put them under quite significant stress in buying back properties and compensating and all the rest of it. Same in Auckland, I think. So you're absolutely right, but Helen's point is valid. How do you plan for an unknown cost of an unknown event in an unknown year? And you can add to that and an unknown response from central government. So it's very hard to get this right. You've just got to do the best we can, particularly around insurance, and affordability quickly collides with getting too carried away or too careful or too conservative in this space, because the event is not certain and you're preventing doing something else that community might value more highly.
Just one other aspect too, when you think about our balance sheet, our assets, pretty much all in this district. So if you do get an AF8 and you're giving rating relief because loss of property, you've also got your own loss of property as well, potentially, in the district. So to a degree, all our eggs are in one basket.
Just the unknown, isn't it? Yeah. Anyway. Okay.
Okay, almost there.
Can I ask just one question?
Oh, yeah, sure, sorry.
Wouldn't that be part of the chief executive's strategy, though, to have, like, to know if you know, the rubbish can carry on, you know that, because, and to know that if the water, there has to be a certain amount of, you know, work done to say what it would scenarios be, you know, and what the cost to keep the rubbish going would be nothing, effectively, because you've still got trucks. Whereas the cost of replacing a sewage pond could be quite significant.
Well, having lived through the Christchurch earthquakes, I never ever in my life planned to go to the toilet in my garden. But that's actually what we had to do because the sewage system didn't work. And so I don't know how you can plan to keep services alive for an unknown event of a catastrophic scale that impacts to the degree that you can't imagine or plan for or prepare for. So yes, you might still have the trucks, but the scale of some of these major events is such that the answer won't rest in plans and from peacetime. You need to be thinking about it. You need to do all the work you can. You need to take the insurance that you can afford, and face the event when it comes to the best of your ability. But it'll be an unknown way, so it won't be as clear as the plan you make in peacetime.
One other aspect too is your largest source of revenue is rates revenue, and if you're giving a rates remission to your ratepayers, then you no longer have that source of revenue. And I've been in that situation up north in Whakatane with both the breach of the Rangataiki River through to Edgecombe and the Matata floods back in 2005.
Yeah.
There was a lot of criticism of the Christchurch City Council at the time for under-insuring their assets, but the same people who were criticising the under-insurance were also criticising the level of rates in Christchurch. And what cover should have the City Council taken, what premiums should have they been paying for an unknown event in the context of affordability and everything else. They're wicked problems. They get very complicated very quickly. You have to do the best you can and think about it in the round, really.
Okay, this last section is just around some principles and strategic direction. So, given what we've looked at today, I'm really looking to get some direction. So I'm not looking for numbers and caps and things. I'm looking to get some direction around principles for where you feel the financial strategy is going in terms of what's important. So I'll just flip to the next slide. That might just give you some ideas. So as a council, what would you prioritise in a financial strategy? And there's just 6 examples up there, and I'm open to hearing others too, but when it comes to balancing, what would be your top 3 pick, for example, from affordability, resilience, flexibility? What is important to council when we start to build that financial strategy? So probably just to put a bit of context around it as well, we're the second lowest in the peer group on rates. We've got the question around intergenerational equity because of the depreciation and recovering that. Levels of service, community wants what they're already getting, but then that's balanced against affordability. We've just touched on resilience and being able to have cover headroom however we provide for the future. There's the balanced budget with the guardrails around that, whether we head towards the 100% or we have specific explanations as to why we are not heading that way. And then flexibility too, because of all the legislative change, we don't necessarily know what's around the corner either.
Carolyn?
To prioritise from those is an impossibility, really. They're all incredibly important, and some things will be intergenerational, for example, the road to the new bridge, and some things are now rates affordability. I mean, they're all absolutely essential. So to say, oh, we want service and value, which of course must underpin all our activity, otherwise it's why we're doing it. So I don't think that's an impossible task, Helen. I don't know how you'd prioritise anything out of that. I think they're all absolutely something we have to bear in mind and do the best we can to make sure they're all acknowledged and represented, really.
Richard?
I would have thought you'd start with Three Waters because you've got a water services plan and it has a program forward. So that's one that And as Helen said, you can manage it, not manage, you can talk about depreciation, you can slow down the speed a bit, you can speed it up, but you want to keep that relatively stable, because once you've done that, that to many ratepayers, that's one of their biggest costs. The water is, it's 40% or something of your total rates bill, so I'm guessing it's somewhere around there. And then when we talked about roading early on, trying to grow the infrastructure and make sure it's a little bit more resilient than it is, there is a slight increase in cost that needs to be done there. And so, but you want to make sure that you understand how you talk intergenerational equity and who affordability, where that affordability falls. Sometimes it falls in sectors the community can afford to pay for that, and others it doesn't. I think roading is a good example. The rural area can afford to pay a bit more for its roading, and the way our targeted rate works, they do pay a big proportion of it. But and you talked about in towns, the water falls on the town people totally, but we can't keep just letting the debt grow and grow and grow, because it will come out eventually.
Any other comments? Deb?
I think I'd like to see more emphasis on intergenerational equity, just because there's definitely a couple of examples. I mean, Stockwater is one, where people have used that service and now there's a debt on it, and most of those people don't receive that service anymore, so who will pay? Waste is another one that was underfunded, and there's going to be people paying up for the lack of charging who never even got their rubbish picked up. So I think that I'd like to see that looked at.
Phil?
Well, Helen asked a question, I'm going to take the challenge. I'd go service and value 1, intergenerational equity 2, and affordability 3. But as others have said, it's a fine line to say what's going to be left off, but you've got to put your toe in the water somewhere.
Yeah, my top 2 would be the service and value and the intergenerational equity, but hard to find a third. Anyone else keen to go for 3?
I don't think you can ignore the affordability issue.
No, I
People
know.
will move and go somewhere else, so I think it's,
Jeanette?
My 2 cents worth, along with affordability, does come prudence and transparency. There's the need to build the infrastructure we need, but at the same time we need to be really prudent, because we don't, there's times when we absolutely don't need all the braces, belts and silver plating, but a good quality service that service the need without all the extras, in my opinion, also falls under affordability and prudence.
Richard?
Could you make a comment, Helen? Our infrastructure, is it better or worse than other districts? Because you talk of intergenerational equality, and that means most people would say now, the next generation shouldn't have to pay for it. The current one should, the future have to pay for it. But I would have thought our district's infrastructures and, our water is in a very good state. So therefore the previous generation have paid forward for it. And so it's easy to say, the next lot, we just push it forward with debt. But maybe that goes to our rates being low. Maybe this current generation have to pay a bit more towards it now.
I don't think you can compare district to district, but I think what I can reflect on, I think we're only funding $2.5 million worth of depreciation against our waters at the moment, and it's 5.1 mil short. And I think we have lifted that in recent years as well. We haven't historically been funding enough depreciation in waters. We're now borrowing, so we're servicing debt and renewing the assets, and potentially going forward, we're going to be asking those same ratepayers to provide for future renewals as well. That's really where the intergenerational equity comes in, and because there's got to be a starting point in it, somebody is going to get caught twice to a degree. Yeah.
Hamish?
And isn't it true to say some of that intergenerational equity is caught by changing regulations? The previous generation, until the rules changed around water treatment, weren't obliged to build the water treatment plants that we currently have. So it's not black and white around whether enough was paid in the past in some cases either.
Hoots?
Question around our audit. The assumptions with depreciation, how big is that chunk of our audit and costs wise?
Can't really comment on the cost in terms of the component of the audit, but it really comes back to them looking at a top level view of our forecast for 10 years, and if we're not funding enough depreciation to pay for our renewals and we're debt funding all of our renewals, they will flag that. So it comes back to that prudence. What is the prudent way to be funding? And they'll look at our financial strategy and say, what decisions have you made? And then they'll look to see that that's reflected in what they see in the numbers. So they don't go asset by asset around that.
But Helen, is it true to say that they have spent quite an amount of time examining valuation methodologies, which has a direct impact on the depreciation? So if you looked at it in a slightly wider sense than just our length of time or depreciation rates, they do spend, anecdotally anyway, an amount of time on their asset valuations, which is, of course, what's driving depreciation.
Yeah, that's usually for that annual report.
Yeah.
Which does build the foundation for the LTP, but then that's around depreciation expense, and if we're using the renewal methodology, it does remove it a little bit.
Any further comments? I think, yeah. There was 6 there. I don't know if we'll get to the 3, but anyway. Tricky.
So just to close it out, that was the second of 3 workshops. Next time, I do need some numbers and things from you. So take this information away, have a think about it in terms of what you're thinking, in terms of limits, rates, debt, how we fund disasters, service levels, depreciation funding. What does that picture ideally look like to you? And we'll try and pull that together in the next workshop. As we head into doing the LTP budgets, they'll spit out another side, and then we'll look to bring the strategy back against the budgets and see how that marries up.
So you're going to share that slide pack with us,
Absolutely.
and there was quite a few slides had questions there from you, so that's for us to sort of mull over and think about for the next workshop, or do you need answers before then?
I think probably the next workshop is fine. Yep.
Yep.
But don't hesitate to send me anything through in between, whether you've got questions or you just want to share some thoughts, or even potentially look for further information as well. I'm happy to receive that.
Yep. No, that was good, and thank you, because that was really useful information, and I don't know how many slides you got up to, 40 something was it? 46. But all very interesting slides and good information for us going into the LTP. So thank you. I'm looking at Mark. Do we have time to do anything else now? No, not just. Are we going to continue on with the workshop? Oh, we got to 12:30. Okay.
Yep,
Let's
we're
go.
keen to carry on
Right.
if you're happy to
Yep.
let us.
So we'll just,
Can we just take a 5-minute
5
break to
minutes
switch
pause?
things over,
Yes,
please?
of course
Thank
we
you.
can. Thank you. We'll be back in 5. so now we just got about 45 minutes to go through the environmental scan, and councillors, you've got this information on Stella. But I'll hand over to Mark. We've got Mel and Femke, so you take us through this. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor Liz. Today, obviously you've had a great overview this morning from Helen around part 2 of the financial strategy. We're going to cover the environmental scan and just a quick overview of sort of the next steps in terms of workshops coming up around the LTP coming forward, just so you've got a bit of a heads up of the work program and what's next. So this is sort of one of 3 core pieces of information that help underpin the LTP. So we're going to talk about the environmental scan in a bit more detail soon. You've got the financial information that you've covered this morning in terms of, I guess, council's position and potential strategy going forward. And then we've got the forecasting assumptions, which is on what the LTP is built on. That we've confirmed a list of last workshop, and we'll bring the sort of draft of those to you at a later workshop. So the environmental scan document that we've put together is on Stella, and essentially it's sort of a useful exercise to help support a robust LTP. It sets the sort of scene and external context for the LTP, and identifies those trends that might affect council the most, particularly in terms of demand, the cost of service, the risk for council, and council's ability to deliver. It also helps inform our financial assumptions and in terms of infrastructure planning and financial strategy and the priorities that we've got going forward. So what we've given you is themed across 7 core topics, we've called them. So seen on the top of the screen there. And it's very much a high level pass. Obviously there's a huge amount of information available we could give you, but you've already had a lot of that today. It's sort of the most recent information we could find and we thought might be useful. So there's a range of sort of data and commentary, including the possible implications for this LTP. We certainly don't. Sorry.
No, you can carry on. But I was just looking, was 2023 the last census?
Right.
Yeah, so that's the latest data we have. Always feels like it's so long ago, isn't it? But
yeah, it's tricky. Yeah. So I mean, we certainly don't claim expertise in all or any of these areas necessarily, but I guess sort of the approach that we suggested today is that we summarise the topic and then work through the scan pages, give you the opportunity to discuss those topics, what sort of stands out, any opportunity for comment or discussion, and I guess also if there's other areas that haven't been covered that you think might be useful to have as context for this LTP, it's the opportunity to highlight those. So in that sense, we'll move forward. Mel.
All right, so what we're seeing in terms of population change and demographics is that the estimated population for 2025 was 37,400 people, which was an increase of 6.9% from 3 years ago. The population is expected to continue growing, and we expect an additional 2,600 households by 2043. Growth will likely be uneven. Methven in particular is expected to experience stronger growth. The proportion of residents aged 65 and over is expected to exceed 25% over the longer term, and the district is becoming more culturally diverse. So what this means for the LTP is growth will increase demand for water, transport, housing, community facilities and public services. Growth will be uneven, requiring place-specific investment and careful timing. An ageing and more diverse population will change accessibility, housing, engagement, and service needs. And population and workforce growth will increasingly depend on attracting and retaining people from elsewhere. So in summary, growth creates opportunity, but its location, timing, and demographic makeup will shape investment needs. So if you want to work through pages 4 and 5 of the environmental scan, and we can do our best to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions, Richard?
With respect to the growth in the housing, because I heard in Selwyn they're getting a lot of houses trying to be consented outside of their, what do you call it? Their designated. What's the word? There's a word for it. Areas.
Their own BCA?
Yeah, their own BCA, which is effectively areas that the council's designated. It'll provide water to and sewage, and it's all in our growth plans. Is ours all within those areas? The growth, because it shouldn't be a problem if that growth is within our scope of thought at the moment.
Sorry, and my answer wasn't right when I heard you carry on. So you're talking about the private plan changes, which is trying to drive growth in areas that hadn't been. There's always the opportunity for the market to drive those private plan changes. In fact, we've seen more here, Ian, haven't we, than 5 years ago. One of the issues that is behind the reform of the RMA is to use the spatial planning and the land use framework to try and clearly signal where those things are much more easily achieved. I guess there's a potential for the private land change putting pressure on infrastructure to diminish under a regime that has the spatial planning in place and trying to make it much easier to build houses and infrastructure in particular parts of the district.
So from that, the houses, all the southern part of it, or the eastern part of our town, there's huge subdivisions out there. They're all, going ahead and growing, and there's lots of, sections for sale out there. But they're all within our scope of what we would expect. So the sewage and the water and all that sort of fits in. We're not suddenly going to be faced with having to suddenly find 10 or 20 million to suddenly find to cover it off as a council. That's right.
Well, the spatial planning exercise will have impact, but that's the work that's in front of us over the next several years.
Carolyn?
Thank you. For long-term planning, we need to have a bit of a handle on the growth and where it's going to come from, and we need to be in a situation where we can prepare for that. When I look at our growth rate, we've gone up here 6.9% over the past 3 years, and I think we forecast in our annual plans and every year about between 0.6 and 0.8%. And I notice going forward, we thought we're going to be at the higher end, and I think we're had 1.2% in some of our documents. When I read this, and I know that you're forecasting over, for 20 years, it's got 0.7% and we grow 6.9%. I mean, can we tighten up those projections? And I know it's difficult because the census isn't reliable anymore, but how do we don't want to be in a situation which I think Richard's alluded to, where we suddenly find we've got huge developments and we haven't got any horizontal infrastructure out there, or any water or any sewage or anything. How do we tighten up that?
Ultimately, we can only use the best information that's available to us, which in our case we rely upon Stats NZ information. So you would have been aware of during the development contributions conversation when we were talking about the medium high projection that we would likely use for this LTP, which I think is where the 1.2 comes in. So we think that's probably more likely for us going forward in terms of what those population projections display. And ultimately it comes back to what the best information is available without us going out and getting a sort of separate piece of work done, which obviously would cost money.
Will cost money. And that may be more cheap, that's poor grammar, that may be less expensive than getting it wrong as well. When I look at, we stuck at 0.8, even though I think we had multiple submitters from Methven telling us that wasn't going to be right, and when we stuck there, or 0.6, or it varied. So we've got in here now 0.7 per annum based on a median projection. How does that fit with the 1.2? We were going to go for the higher projection when we discussed it about a month ago, whenever it was last meeting.
Yeah, I mean, that's just a statement in terms of what we've included in here. That's okay. The the projection we're going to use will come through our forecasting assumptions. So we'll bring that back.
And when we just went through, Helen gave us a very, very interesting workshop on financial matters. Her projection in here was different from this as well. So I think we need to tidy that up a little bit internally, I think, as well, is to be consistent.
Yeah,
And
I think
I've been banging on about that for years, but it just would make it easier for.
Yeah, I think that was more the growth figure, so I was actually looking backwards. And I mean, the reality is, it's a point in time, it's an estimate, it's never going to be perfect, but it's what we have.
Yeah, but you talk to Ian when you work it out, with looking at building consents and you doing the average of 2.5 homes in Ashburton and 2.5 people per house in Ashburton and 2.4 in Methven. You don't just go by because I think the census has been a little bit disregarded in recent times, hasn't it, with poor compliance and.
Well, I wouldn't say it's disregarded. I mean, that's the best information we have available. Certainly, we're talking internally about that, and I guess the other aspect to think about is there's a range of different forms of growth. Population growth is one aspect, but there's household growth, there's transport growth, there's all sorts of forms of growth that are going to impact on the services that we deliver.
Tony, did you want to comment?
Yep, just to add a little bit further context too, so the loss of the census or the loss of the way in which the government is planning to do the census in the future, it's going to rely more on centralised based data. So we will still end up with population estimates, and we will still end up with forecast population growth forecasts coming out of that. If anything, it's going to. This is reliant less on point in time and more on what they're seeing coming through in that centralised data sets. The estimated population growth is updated on an annual basis. So that's that figure of 37,400, and that is derived from birth, deaths and migration patterns. So it's fairly accurate with what's going on in the community.
Okay, Julie?
For the likes of somewhere like Methven and the growth there, do we know what type of growth? Like, will that be people retiring to Methven because they will have different needs and expectations to young family going there and buying a house and that kind of thing? Do we know?
I think the best we can get is sort of the age, gender breakdown. I think it doesn't go to any other sort of narrower field. So in terms of that particular area, so we do get growth figures for what's called a SA2 stats area, which comes back to sort of that Methven area and other areas across the district, but I think it only goes to age, sex information. There's no other.
Richard?
I know we've got the ethnicity and how it's changing over time, but majority of all but a few of our services are, for a better word, colourblind in that, if I could list them, we go through three waters, roading, waste management, open spaces. Most of those are, no matter what ethnicity we have live in our district, if it's suddenly we all become suddenly Asian, that wouldn't actually affect that because those services are just core services that, no matter what ethnicity you are, you would still use them the same. There's only the other ones, I'd say, some of perhaps the ones that Tony Durham does, and her, you know what I mean, the cultural sort of ones, that's the change. But majority of our big cost services are actually colourblind to that. They don't really care where you came from, or everybody goes to the loo the same place.
We hope. Yes. Right, okay. So is there any other questions on the population change and demographics? No, we'll move on.
So this next aspect covers the economy, and you'll see with the document we've sort of covered an international, national and local perspective, but I guess in summary, and recognising that we're in quite a dynamic international environment, the global growth is projected to weaken, while those international conflicts and trade uncertainty continues, and obviously that's contributing strongly to volatility. On a local level, Ashburton's economy has grown 1.6 in the year to March 26, so that's based on Infometrics data, and that includes filled jobs increasing and unemployment at a level of 3.5, but both of those sort of below the national average. Consumer spending's declined, but there's an ongoing increase in dwelling consents, and obviously the primary sector is critical and important to the district. So in terms of high level implications for the LTP, the reality is global uncertainty is likely to remain high. We don't know where things like the Iran conflict is going to end up or when that's going to be resolved. There's going to be ongoing trade tension, which will impact on energy prices and also flow through to cost of living pressures for individuals, but also for council services, obviously, because we also use things like electricity. Ashburton's economy does remain relatively strong, so obviously supported by dairy, the ongoing business growth, relatively low unemployment, housing activity and tourism. But there is the potential that export returns, business confidence could continue to be affected by what's going on, and that slower global growth, weaker international demand. The workforce availability is one aspect that could be a key constraint going forward, particularly where there's an increasing competition for skilled workers and an ageing population, which means you've got a less size of a workforce. But there's also that aspect of technology, automation, productivity improvements that might offer opportunities and attract workforce, increase skills. So the critical thing, I guess, is how we look to balance affordability, financial position, economic growth, and investing in our infrastructure and our services within that environment, which, as we've heard this morning, won't necessarily be an easy task.
Any questions on, I think, slides 6 to 9? Richard?
There's no comments in the economy part around the rationalisation and the change in the Resource Management Act, which will, our district, be one of the ones that could be affected greatly if it could, enable greater use of our agricultural areas, and that will cause growth and land use change, and that would affect our long-term plan because our rural areas will become more intense, therefore they'll need better roads and more infrastructure and all that sort of stuff. So has there been any thought of that? Because that's the biggest change that our district could face. If there's more irrigation available, if there's more, intense agriculture, that could actually, from the council's point, it could change our demand profile, you'd say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, possibly. And I'm not aware of any work that's been done on that space. And I guess obviously you've got to have the rules in place for that to be enabled. I don't know, Ian, have you got any comment on that?
Through the chair, I think the short answer to it is it's too early. We just don't know enough of the detail about what the actual implications on the district or the region or the country will be yet, because a lot of the details of what this legislation will say is yet to be announced and is quite a long way down the track yet. So unfortunately, no, I don't think I think it would be premature to be making assumptions based on that.
Hoops.
Question around the consumer spending. Is there anything in those figures to do with online shopping? The 2.2% decline, is that related at all?
We'd have to check, but I don't think it covers online. But I can go back to you on that one.
And so all of these figures are from March, but I think Hamish, you sent through something from the second quarter, which I think tourism was up, house values had gone up again, so everything's kind of moving in the right direction, I guess, isn't it? For Ashburton in particular, yeah. Right, move on to the next one.
Yes, we'll move on to the political landscape. And I think as the first sentence in the environmental scan states that a number of reforms are underway that significantly affect how council works and what councils do in the future. And I think it's safe to say that every long-term plan has its challenges, but that this one is significantly developed during a period of significant reform and uncertainty. So on the left, you have an overview of some of the major reform works and just highlighting the overlap in the timing. They're all in more detail in the scan itself, but you could roughly group them in 3 groups. So you've got the council structure and purpose reform works, like simplifying local government, rates capping, and the local government system improvements amendment bill, which talks about the new purpose of local government and the focus on core services, moving away from the well-beings. Another group is about the infrastructure and funding. It's the water services reform, and it was October last year that we established our in-house business unit, and that is underway, the implementation of that. You've got the change in the development levies, replacing the DC, the development contribution systems, and there's the local government infrastructure funding and financing bill, which makes the changes to the Infrastructure Funding and Financing Act.
Just a question from Carolyn.
Thank you. Thanks, Vempa. Before I begin, I like this report very much, and I appreciate all the links in it. It's really, really comprehensive and really good, so thank you. But why I'm commenting is on page 10, simplifying local government, Ashburton District Council has opted into the backstop process, blah, blah, but we've also had a motion at council where we're going to be positive with regards to our inclusion in the South Canterbury, if you like, Head Start proposal. Do you think that needs to be added to this commentary?
Hamish?
We can change what you like. I think this is accurate, though. The resolution of council was to go to backstop. And yes, following that, you've agreed to be warm and cooperative to the proposal that we were put in. So that both those things are true. We can change the language if council wishes, but you did resolve to go into backstop. So it's accurate in the sense that it
Absolutely,
yeah.
Absolutely. I'm not denying that, but I wonder if we do need a wee sentence to say.
So maybe the sentence could just say that Ashburton was included in the South Canterbury Head Start proposal.
Yeah, because it was subsequent to this motion.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you. Just this sort of the third group of reform works, which is more planning and regulation related, which is the RMA, the Building Amendment Bill, and the Emergency Management Reform. So what all of this means for the long-term plan, the purpose of many of the reforms is to create, obviously, opportunities for more effective infrastructure, funding and delivery. But because so many of the major policy decisions are still to be made, it creates, and a lot is happening at the same time, it just creates pressure on the reforms, pressure on you as the governance, pressure on council as an organisation, and pressure on the planning of all the work that needs to be done to do this right. The uncertainty also makes taking long-term decisions makes it more complicated. It means that while pieces are still moving, you still have to consider predict what's going to happen in the future and how the impacts are gonna be, and that is complicated for you as decision makers, but also for the community to understand what they're actually talking about in the next 10 years. What we are talking about, what that means, and thirdly, it has impacts. The current reform work on council's priorities and on our government structure, the funding and the regulation that you have available, the tools you have to work with. So it will have a significant impact on the LGP. If there's any questions from page 10 to 12.
And it's probably an LTP like no other, really, isn't it, with all these different reforms in place. And even though we've opted to go into backstop, we've been included into the South Canterbury Head Start, we don't know when or if that will all come into effect. So, yeah, there's a lot of unknowns in there as well. Any questions, Julie?
Oh, sorry, just a comment. Back to Helen's presentation with the 6 points up there, and number 6 was flexibility. And I think basically flexibility needs to be the overarching theme, I think, for anything we really do. I don't know how you put that into a long-term plan, but it's like everything that we put in there has to go how much flexibility is built into that thing. So that's just an observation I've made.
Thanks for that, Hamish.
I'm just noting too that one of the other significant uncertainties as every 3 years rolls around is the National Land Transport Program. And again, this year we're seeing, despite everyone's rhetoric, the programs are not aligned. So we will have to conclude the LTP and adopt it before we know what support we'll have in the roading program. So there's the same uncertainty for our largest spend activity that we face every LTP, and this one will be no different.
Thank you. Any other questions on pages 10 through to 12? Nope.
All right. The next item is technology. And maybe just some of the facts that we that stand out in this area is AI. Obviously, a 2025 survey that we reference in the environmental scan shows that 87% of the larger New Zealand businesses now use some form of AI, and which is a huge increase from just 48% in 2023. So that is moving very fast. There's been a big uptake in electrical vehicles. The sales of hybrids have actually by now overtaken petrol vehicle sales, and the fuel crisis has even driven this further this year. Technology or innovation is a big driver of changes in the way we work in some of our key industries in the district, whether it is in the agriculture or in manufacturing or logistics or service deliveries industries. Digital service is increasing. People are expecting to do a lot of things more online as well. I think we are moving away into a more digital world for all of our services, and that also comes with increasing sort of issues, which we talk about a bit later, how that impacts the long-term plan, as it requires capability of your community to be able to keep up, and it also provides risks like cybersecurity and data management and protection.
Julie?
Presumably, council use of AI is going to keep rising. And just from things that I've read, articles I've read about AI, it seems like right now we're in the honeymoon phase as far as costs go with AI. So do you have any forecasts of how much AI technology will actually cost in the future? Because my understanding is those big AI companies are going to start charging quite a lot.
I've not seen anything specifically forecasting increases in the cost of AI, but it is true that as a council we're starting to have paid licences for AI products that has added some cost. We're also getting some efficiency gains. So, but where that's heading, I've not seen anything projected with any real clarity yet.
Sorry, Tony?
Thank you, Mayor Liz. Just further to Hamish's point, in response to Councillor Moffat's question, yes, that the costs are likely to go quite large, but I think that's if you're in the generative AI space, which is where you're asking AI to automate X function with that function with that function to create something new. That seems to be where the costs are likely to really explode. The use of AI on a license-based subscription, as councils are dipping its toe into the water right now, is fairly bound up because it's not looking to get into that automated space, like giving AI the responsibility to book your flights with your credit card number and transfer your whole holiday planning to that. That's not the space council's looking to enter into at this stage.
Russell?
Thank you. The EV vehicle uptake, it's not just the cost of the vehicle. We don't have the end infrastructure for charging those. We do have the underground infrastructure, but the ports aren't there. And I forget what each one of those was going to cost, but it was not cheap. I can't remember what it was. But so, yeah, I think we just have to be careful on that one. There's other associated costs that go with that, and
Yeah, and I think it's a trend for the district. What does that mean for this council as a more deliberate decision?
Carolyn?
Thanks. I'm just following on from Julie's comment on the AI. I understand how AI today, I don't understand what's going on, I don't know a lot about AI, but I understand how it can improve efficiencies and access to better information. But when we've got what this means for us, council wouldn't have a role to play, for example, in these examples you've got here, like particularly agriculture advances in precision farming, emissions reduction technology, automation and data driven. That's not really, those farming examples, we would leave them to the people in that line of business to deal with. Am I right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's more the benefits for
Okay,
everyone.
for the region.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Richard?
With respect to AI, wouldn't it be for the council, the scrutiny that AI allows everyday people to do of council that's huge, with that Lagoima things and all that sort of stuff now, because that's going to get, and even the buildings, everything we do, they're going to be able to reach in, and people with a tap a button can just bog the system down or can see so much. That's a big fear for councils, or not a fear, it's a
Not so much a fear,
cost.
but an absolute trend we've already seen. So Lagoimas are significantly higher than they've previously been, and they're in significantly more detail, and they would appear in many cases to be generated by AI. So it's absolutely a trend that is real. Yeah.
Phil?
Isn't the last paragraph probably the critical part, which is the district's ability to benefit from the technological change will depend on strong digital connectivity, workforce capability and willingness to adapt to new ways of working, which you struggle with that with this old fella, or the last bullet anyway. But I guess, where do we fit in, the team, where do we fit in with those three? What's our role in any of those three, and do we have a role? I mean, EA is probably doing their bit with the other telecoms to conductivity, but other areas we may have a bit of work in terms of workforce capability and willingness to adapt to new ways. Well, I thought you've made a good summary.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's an organisational role, so we have an organisational role to enable all of that to happen, and from a council point of view, there's an advocacy role to ensure that the district's getting what it needs, if there's government funding involved or something like that. And I guess there's also that potential for partnership with other agencies around how we might harness some of the clever ideas that are out there and apply it to our own business and vice versa. So it's a hugely evolving space. Everyone's in the early phases and trying to understand what it might look like and how it might impact into both them personally and as an organisation going forward. So,
thank you.
Deb?
I did just have some food for thought on the EV vehicles, on how it might be relevant for us. As an EV driver, I'm actually now more likely to drive because the cost barrier has reduced for me. So if there is going to be a long-term impact for us, if people might move to EV and then decide that actually it's not that expensive and our roads get used more, which for us, as we know, in our roading network is an impact. outside of the infrastructure for the charging stations, it is also, I'm not paying petrol, so I'm not paying all those taxes that come through central government to fund that roading. So it's probably not anything that we can plan for in the LTP, but it is going to be a consideration going forward on how roading in general gets paid for.
And that's a really strong point, and the government is well aware of that, and that's one of the reasons why the National Land Transport Fund is under pressure, because electric vehicles are not paying in the same way that petrol vehicles are. So I think the government has signalled the need to change the regime so that everyone who's using the roads is paying those same taxes, not fuel dependent. So that's likely to change in the short term. But again, the central government will be driving those changes, not local government.
Julie?
I'm just wading into stuff that I don't really understand, by the way, talking about AI, but with something like water metering, for example, I presume AI might be like, oh, there's an app for that, so would council, if there was technology that was available for some of those type tasks, would council be looking at that, and would that just be presented as it came up type thing?
Yeah, and I think your water meters is a good example, and you've heard of the trial of the smart meters in Rakaia, where they're using technology in a way that's quite different to the old days of a meter reader or a manual process. So there is no doubt that the advancement of technology will impact council directly in areas like that.
Phil?
Are you guys sort of signalling that there could be some long-term plan costs for us around cybersecurity, privacy, etc., with the advancing technologies? Is that something we should just...
I think probably that's a reality in terms of the ability of some of these tools to reach further into that space, and making sure that obviously our information is protected. Yep, that's definitely a possibility.
Righto, next one is society, page 15.
Okay, so in terms of society, what we're seeing is that housing and rentals remain relatively affordable compared with national measures. Crime is below the national rate. School attendance remains stable. Job seeker support increased 9.5% in 12 months. The NEET rate was 12.2%, which is below the national average, the national figure, and most residents report a positive quality of life and sense of community. So things to consider for the LTP are that livability of the district will support population and workforce attraction. But it's also important to note that community-wide results can hide pockets of disadvantage. Population change will increase and alter demand for facilities and services. And skills development, youth pathways and inclusive access remain important, as well as protecting places and services that support connection and well-being.
So just a question on that job seeker support, and so it's increased by 9.5%, but our unemployment rate is reasonably low, so that kind of does... How does that balance out?
It'll probably come back to the way the percentages come back. So, so it's probably a small. The unemployment rate is a small percentage that brings in other information, whereas this is just focusing in on that job seeker support.
On the job seeker support. Okay.
And I think I'm looking at Ian, but I think the last time that we received some of these stats from MSD or Infometrics or someone, they had a more technical explanation for why that situation is explainable. So maybe we can look that out and circulate that.
Yeah. and good to see our NEET rate is reasonably low because it had been quite up to about 16% in the past. Carolyn?
The most appalling statistic in that is something that is outside our realm, is that 59% of school students didn't attend more than 90% of their classes. No, they attended, so 41% didn't attend 90% of their classes. And that's on average with the rest of the country.
Yep.
Yeah.
So there is good resource out there, and safe meat. I know. Phil?
So I agree with Carolyn's comment. That is a concern. I guess the job seeker and the NEET rate, for me, is probably the greater concern. If you look at job seeker, I mean, we've got 770 people in our community that are not employed, but probably I shouldn't say worse because it's still bad, but probably the concerning figure is the 12% of young people that are, if I've read it right, not in employment or education or training. And to me, they're the ones we've got to really grab quickly. And I know it's not our role, Hamish, but as a community, I mean, it's certainly something that we've got to think about.
To a degree, though, it does come under Mayor's Task Force for Jobs, but...
Well, it used to be the sole focus of the Mayor's Task Force of Jobs, and of course that program now focuses much more on the job seeker list, and a very small portion of it is the NEETs. So it remains an issue across New Zealand, and Ashburton district is no different for sure.
So I guess it's more a flag about, and it's not a question I want you to answer, but more what can we do, and what can we do as a nation, because they're the people that are falling through.
And our NEET rate compared to some other areas is quite low, so yeah. Russell?
And the government's put a lot of resource into attendance programs at the school, which is delivered by Safer Mid Canterbury and the Ashburton district, and they have 4 staff involved in that now, where it used to be 1 part-time person. There's now 4 staff doing the attendance service, and I think as attendance gets better, that'll flow on into those other things of those younger people who can't find jobs, because maybe if they just lift the level of education a little bit, it'll assist them in their job hunt, and it's that turning up every day for school will be like turning up to work. If you get out of the habit, it's very hard to do. So
yeah, and we know how important driver's licenses are for those young people. There's no public transport here. Getting to work requires effort, and so I know we have supported a number of schemes in that effort to help young people get their driver's license. So there's a range of things that we are involved with, to a relatively small degree given our mandate, but we are across.
Any other questions on page 15 to 17? Nope. Natural environment next.
So this one obviously is covering off the natural environment. Freshwater, rivers, lakes, aquifers, fundamental to our community going forward, biodiversity and our economy. Obviously water quality is critical as well, and the potential pressures on that in various parts of the district. Maintaining biodiversity, so through unique landscapes that we have, like braided rivers and wetlands, and ensuring that we've got protection and restoration of threatened ecosystems. The impact of climate change, hazards, drought, flooding, extreme weather, and how that will flow through to our natural environment, but also the impact on our services. So in terms of those implications, it's around obviously we want to look after our natural resources. They're critical to our Ashburton's success, our economy, our communities and our quality of life. That freshwater management aspect will remain a challenge and require ongoing balance between environmental outcomes and economic growth. Climate change is likely to impact and increase the pressure on infrastructure, the community and the environment, meaning sort of resilience planning is essential to the future. And, you know, I guess overall that our long-term prosperity as a district does depend on balancing environmental, economic and community needs.
Any questions on page 18 and 19? And I'm just conscious of time.
Yep.
Do you want, Richard?
Just should there be a comment in that local, because our problem with the environment is that we have these large urban populations that try to impose their vision on our district, where our district should be imposing its own vision. That's the core of, you know, you mentioned some of the projects here, and it's not the locals that are moaning about it, it's just some other people are moaning, and, you know, Mars $1 million spent on legal fees, which is, you know, it should be, and the vision going forward is the same. It's just we can't seem to breach the external thing. So that's perhaps, you know, that would be something that it's part of the overview, isn't it?
That's your call. It's not my political comments.
We could potentially refer to apparent expectation differences between urban and rural communities as just part of the environmental scan.
Phil?
Not wanting to drag it out, I know you've got your eye on the clock, but I think Mark covered it off reasonably well in terms of a balance of those environmental, dare I say it, economic, because that's actually the part of it, and the social. So actually if we've got those, I think it's actually covered off largely in that. I think there's a question I'd like to just refer to get some additional information from Mark in terms of the water quality in Bullet 2, but I'll come back to you, Mark, when I've got my facts.
When's our next LTP workshop planned for? Because can we finish this off then?
Yep.
Yeah.
So maybe if you want to finish it there, but maybe I can show you what's coming up.
Yes, that would be good, thank you.
Just to give you a picture of the workshop program. So our next workshop is on the 9th of September, which is a full day. At this stage, and I mean the topics there are sort of what we've initially targeted. So it might be subject to change as we move through and different things move forward.
Yep.
But obviously we'll finish this off on that day. And then there's a series of workshops going forward, some of them of various times, just trying to fill in the times that have been made available in September and ongoing through October and beyond. So we'll put these slides in Stella just for you to have a look over that, and
thank you. And we'll just finish that. So, Russell, did you want to comment?
I was just going to say, there's not much here. We could finish it after the Water Services Committee today, this one, because we did have your other meeting booked in. It will only probably take half an hour to finish this, wouldn't it? And we could do that at the conclusion of Water Services, which was probably only going to go for an hour.
Good suggestion. Have you got time to do? Yeah. Okay. Let's look at that then. So we'll finish now. We've got our Three Waters meeting at 1 o'clock, and then depending how that goes, we can reconvene this for half an hour or so just to finish off the last slide. So then when we start on the 9th of September, we start clean.
No problem.
Thank you very much. Back at 1 for Three Waters.